Welcome to our second day of the European University and Culture Summit. We will begin this day with panel 4. Panel 4 is chaired by Inês Câmara, who I now give the floor to. Go ahead.
Hello, good morning. Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me to moderate this very interesting panel. Our panel this morning will be about integrating artistic experiences in the study plans of higher educations. And I think that's a very interesting challenge. And basically the theme will be about how to develop a project for generalized artistic education for higher education students that may be established, what goals to set, and mainly what kind of assessment tools we could define to try to feel the impact of this measure in higher education. We will have today with us from all parts of the world, it's a great honor, Professor Fernando León Garcia, President-elect of the International Association of University Presidents, Professor Jennifer Wagner Lawler, Professor and author of Penn State University, USA, and it's very, very early there, so she's a very feisty warrior to start the morning with us, and we're very honored for that. And then from the other part of the world, also Professor Peter Marks from the University of Sydney in Australia, and it's wonderful to have him with us. And finally, a dear colleague right up in the north of Portugal, where the conference is happening, because I'm in Lisbon, Professor Alexandra Sá Costa, that is a professor and researcher in education. I think we're going to have a very, very nice panel. And I really think Saturday, I was in another conference, and one of the panelists was talking about gentle subversion. And I really feel that this kind of issues being discussed at this level in the universities is this kind of movement. So I'm really looking forward to that. I will now give the floor to Professor Fernando León Garcia's presentation, and see you in a little while. Thank you.
Hello. It's a pleasure to join you in this EU University and Culture Summit. On behalf of the International Association of University Presidents, we welcome and are honored to take part in this distinctive forum that in our case, we will try to reflect on what we have labeled developing well-rounded persons post-pandemic. I believe that what was labeled as a Black Swan event has impacted higher education around the world extensively, and it has challenged the institutions around the world to cope, to adjust, to restore, to engage in radical changes, to prove the resilience of higher education, to have the capacity to adjust or pivot. But I think the most important thing is that higher education should look this as not a storm, but as something that is equivalent to climate change, where the impact is going to be tremendous and the impetus for change is mandatory for all colleges and universities. We have definitely moved between 2020 and now 2021 from what was an emergency stage to one that is transitional, and where all of us should be preparing for what will be post-pandemic and an opportunity for transformation. That said, we should not forget that as we go about realigning what institutions need to do in our different regions, we should reflect first and foremost on mission, on the quality of what we offer, on the financial stability, so that it is not a short-lived effort, and at the same time that we look at the strategic scenarios, not for 1 year, but for the next 3 to 5 years. And that at the same time, we have experience conditions that have led us to empathy, solidarity, to look at what we do in a very flexible manner, but at the same time, to look for opportunities to do them better. Moving into the topic, I think that it's very important to look at the different perspectives on how it is that universities attempt to address the development of the whole individual. It is something that we have been trying to carry out across higher education, that was there before the pandemic, that has raised serious questions during the pandemic. But if you look at the different approaches, I think that what we need to do is, as a result of the pandemic, where do we go from there? As you might all know, depending on where you are located, most countries offer professionally oriented programs, and some of them have curriculum that is focused on the whole person. There are others who have professionally oriented programs, and they offer extracurricular activities that are focused on the whole person. That is, not as formal coursework and learning objectives, but as something that you see supplemental to. And you also see different colleges and universities, including cultural and artistic activities, as we try to develop that whole person. The degree to which this is implemented across different universities has to do a lot with what is their mission and what is the institutional choice in terms of how they want to go about it. We carried out at AIUP a survey during the second half of 2020 that involved over 700 institutions, and that covered most of the regions around the world, that yielded very interesting results. Overall, what we found were that most institutions were not ready to face the pandemic. And most leaders see that in the next 3 to 5 years, there will be a growing trend such that most institutions will engage in a combination of modes of delivery, face-to-face, hybrid, online, which again, as you think about how it is that you can prepare the whole person, there will need to be adjustments. In the case of my own institution located in Mexico, we took the opportunity to not only react to what the pandemic required, but we looked at it as an opportunity to innovate. And in that sense, we created what is SETI's Flex 360, which allows us to pivot and to adjust how it is that we deliver education depending on what the status of the pandemic was at any given point in time. Online, hybrid, face-to-face, any combination thereof, and that includes extracurricular activities. I think then that as we try to bring into focus where we are, all institutions who have as a mission and as an institutional choice to try to develop the whole individual. And again, by developing the whole individual, we are referring not only to what occurs within the classroom, what occurs within the specific program, what is the overall educational experience. The challenge will be how to replicate both in a physical as well as in a virtual setting. Post-pandemic, the choice will be ours to include comprehensively in one or a combination of settings the following. Number one, degree programs specifically pertaining to culture and the arts. What it is that you decide to implement will be a matter of institutional capacity. The professoriate, the facilities, and all the environment necessary to promote these extensively. Second, curricular offerings that relate to culture and the arts that are embedded into any degree offerings. In other words, it doesn't matter whether you are an engineer or a law student This approach would make sure that regardless of your degree program, you are being exposed to a dose of culture and arts as an undergraduate student. The third is that you approach this in addition as extracurricular offering, supporting culture and the arts. This would mean that after your classes, the institution would have any program where those who want to have the opportunity to learn, exercise, perform in terms of culture and the arts. And then another very important aspect to consider is activities beyond the university and into the community, promoting culture and the arts. We believe personally that it is one or more that of these options that colleges and universities should consider to be a true institution committed to the development of the whole individual. We, again, thank you for this opportunity to share these thoughts on developing the whole person. We invite you to look at the overall results of the IAUP survey, and we invite you to join us at the IAUP Triennial Conference this summer, July 29th through the 31st of 2021. Thank you very much again.
Sorry. It was so interesting to have Professor Fernando Leon Garcia's presentation. And now I will pass the word to Professor Jennifer Wagner-Lawler. And the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. A little over 3 years ago at my institution, which is Penn State University, an art exhibition that I had proposed and then co-curated opened at our Palmer Museum of Art. Now, I should say that I'm a literature person working in a department of women's gender and sexuality studies. I have no degree in art anything, but I am passionate about environmental issues, and in particular, I've been involved with the anti-plastics movement, and so I had this idea that we should have an exhibition on artwork made from waste plastic, which I was seeing all kinds of wonderful artwork from around the world that was created in this way. And so I proposed it, even though I had no idea of how I would go about doing this. And lo and behold, the show was mounted after 3.5 years of work, and it was called Plastic Entanglements, Ecology, Aesthetics, Materials. As I say, it was organized around plastic, the item, but also the idea of plasticity. And in the end, we had 27 artists and about 60 works of art. The show traveled from Penn State to 3 other university institutions, University of Oregon, Smith College, and finally University of Wisconsin. And the exhibition was the most successful in terms of visitors to our museum that they'd had in years. And I never found this out, but I would venture to say ever in the history of the museum. And the attendance during the 6 months that it was on our campus was 30% higher than it had been the previous year. So part of the work of pulling it together, this exhibition, was to create co-curricular programming, which in the end included a lecture series featuring not only several of the artists themselves, in fact, I think 6 of them, but also faculty from around the university. And that included departments in the humanities, the social sciences, and the sciences, and the business school. And what was especially gratifying to me was that this single event was so interdisciplinary, and it was university-wide. One of the key questions for this panel that we were given is, how can we get students interested in artistic experiences? And I would combine that with the question, with the next one that the panel was asked, which is what transversal topics should be defined. I wanted to put them together in order to speculate a little bit about why our exhibition was successful, and why I sincerely hope that the European Union will model for the rest of the world, or at least for the United States, who is not investing, shall we say, funds in culture and the arts the way the European Union does. How the arts should be integrated into all levels of higher education, not to mention before that, but also after that, right? We talk a lot about lifelong learning in this country. I don't know if that's a thing where you are. And I think that thinking about questions that will engage people really throughout their lives is a critical factor here. Getting students interested in artistic experiences, from making art to viewing art to studying art, by inviting them to understand that art and science should perhaps never have been separated and hierarchized in the way that they've been since the 18th century. As a lit person, I have always contended that really, in the Romantic period, that they understood that both art and science are observational activities, right? And the artist and the scientists both think metaphorically, they both think materially, they both seek forms of elegance, whether they're abstract or material, and also that they both seek a kind of pleasure that I think is perhaps described best as a pleasure of wonder. Right? And those of us who believe in the arts, which I do, and I think that art can and does change the world, I like to talk about the work that art can do, and not just about artworks as objects. Art has been called force work, for example, referring to the kinds of force fields that are energized by interchanges of art and environment, art, work, and spectator. This idea of force work also refers to the work going on between the material and the idea that the artist is bringing to it. And what ended up being so effective about the plastics exhibition was that the molding of plastic material was shown to have taken on a sort of life of its own, in that plastic as a material actually realized visions of the future. I'm not the only one who's written about plastic as a kind of symbolic form of capitalism, which plastic continues to represent with remarkable efficiency and mythical power. Art presents more than the symbolic, though. Art literally impresses us, entering our body through our senses, materializing itself on us and in us in that way. So a kind of reciprocal shaping of object and subject, in the human subject particularly. And this reciprocal shaping is I think, something that the manufacturers of plastics have long recognized, right? That there is through advertising in particular, there's absolutely brilliant advertising that sort of cultivates the myth of a future that's created by and through plastic, especially during World War II or period during and after World War II. They understood the future as plastic, as being moldable, right? As being malleable. And of course, they were going to be the ones to mold it. There was a lot of sort of nationalistic language involved, especially toward the end of the war. Technology was going to win the war. Now, my point of all this is that sorry, I'm just jumping here. The point of all this is that the success of our exhibition was precisely because there wasn't a single area of study that you couldn't bring to bear on the topic, right? So just in my kind of description, I've mentioned, the arts, advertising, certainly, communications in general, material sciences. And I have to say, it was actually the sciences on our campus that were more, well, I would say, that were most excited about the exhibition. They were really appreciative that the idea of talking about not just materiality of art, but the actual materials, the chemistry of plastics, the technology for molding, and the connection of science to art production and to an idea about society and culture. As a matter of fact, the sciences at my university, we were looking around, for funding from anybody we could think of, and the sciences were the first to give money to help support the exhibition, and they gave the most. and a lot of the lectures we had were actually from our scientists. Someone talking about climate change and the role of plastics. Someone talking about these new technologies of bioplastics. Just all kinds of talks. And one of the most interesting ones came from a business school faculty member who talked about innovation. Right? So we did, as organizers of this exhibition, we did the best we could to include everybody, so many different areas of study. And what actually frustrated me was that we had so short of a time, right? And that if we had the person power to make it happen, we would have not just been organizing the exhibition, but we would have been talking to faculty about running courses, creating learning communities. This had been my dream, to create a learning community around this topic, but going at it from any discipline that wanted to join along. And so that's kind of a long answer to these questions of, how should we do it, and how do we get them interested? Students loved it, right? And I think it was because there was sort of no possibility that was turned away, no possibility for reacting to it. And I would integrate arts into the general curriculum from day one. As I say, I think learning communities that building it in from the beginning with writing courses. We did have a beginning writing course. We focus on the exhibition and communications, and then going from there. Thinking about clusters of courses that could follow them through with maybe increasing levels of broadness and intellectual complexity. I think that we should be thinking about so-called wicked problems, right? Wicked precisely because they must be addressed in an interdisciplinary way. They must be addressed with creativity and with precise observation. I don't think we should focus on solving anything because then you become programmatic. And I think the focus of these efforts to integrate should be on not on solving, but on just wondering, like, what is there to wonder about? And you know, and why should we wonder about things? I don't think students these days wonder enough. I will stop there and thank you for inviting me, Fatima, to talk. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It was a truly inspiring contribution. And you were talking, and I went and I tried to find this quote from Karl Popper, because you were talking and I was remembering. I'm just going to read it before passing the word to Professor Peter Marks. No pressure, Peter. I'm going just to quote Karl Popper.
Yes.
I think that there is only one way to science, or to philosophy for that matter, to meet a problem, to see its beauty and fall in love with it, to get married to it and to live with it happily, till death do you part, unless you should meet another and even more fascinating problem, or unless indeed you should obtain a solution. Wait.
Thank
But
you. That's
even if you
perfect.
obtain a solution, you may then discover to your delight the existence of a whole family of enchanting, though perhaps difficult problem children, for whose welfare you may work with a purpose to the end of your days. And I really think that you just described the process, Jennifer, and it was so inspiring.
Yeah,
Thank you
I
so
think
much.
I've actually in one piece that I've written about plastic, I think I quoted Karl Popper, as a matter of fact. So there you go.
Thank you so much. Peter, I had a sneak preview to your presentation, so I'm one of the privileged ones, and I really thought it was interesting. Welcome to our panel.
Thank you. So thanks for inviting me. I was going to start off by saying that I bring an outsider's perspective, but since the session started off with Fernando from Mexico and then moved to Jennifer in the United States, I guess to some degree we're all outsiders as well as insiders. But anyway, as I say, I kind of bring an outsider's perspective to the sorts of questions I think the summit aims to tackle. But please forgive me if the points that I raise misunderstand the European situation at present. Interestingly enough, to just carry on with the Karl Popper theme, when I'm like Jennifer, I'm an English lit person, but I did a combined degree in politics, and we studied Karl Popper. And one of the interesting things in terms of Australia, where I'm speaking from, is that Australia, in a sense, proved the notion of falsifiability, which is the key idea, one of Popper's key ideas, that if a theory can't be falsified, it's not scientific. And of course, one of the ongoing notions in Europe was that swans were white. That was the part of the definition of swanness, until they came to Australia and found black swans, and then they had to just reconfigure how they understood swanness. Okay, so let's move on. I did my PhD at University of Edinburgh, so I have some sense of the European situation, and I taught at Hull. And I know that certainly in Britain, there's far more concentration with subjects. If you take, for example, English literature, that's all you do. So when I moved, I'm a New Zealander, but I live in Australia. When I came back to Australia and taught, one of the things that took me a long time to recognize was that the Australian system, or the Sydney system, was far more like the American system, where students doing an undergraduate degree, an arts degree, it was more a smorgasbord. They could choose a variety of subjects and they can mix and match, and really only decided what their major was in the second, sometimes the third year. So take that into consideration for the things that I say. And just to give a bit more context, so I've been at Sydney for 25 years and I'm just about to retire, which is possibly about time. The university itself is the oldest in Australia, but it's not very old in European terms. It was established in the 1850s. For many years, it was the only university in Sydney. But Sydney is now a city of over 5 million people, and the University of Sydney is one of more than half a dozen universities within the city itself. It remains the largest university in Sydney, certainly, and possibly in Australia. It's got about 70,000 students, about 8,000 staff. So it has its implications, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. All that said, Sydney is a massive enterprise, the university, and it usually ranks amongst the better universities in the world, and in assessments that have a small validity, but possibly not much. But I don't pretend to enjoy all the changes that have taken place that my university has made, particularly in terms of what I'm sure everyone's experienced: increasing managerialism, the notion of the university as an economic enterprise, and of education as a product sold to our customers who are students. And of course, they have that same sense. They, over time, have come to have that same sense, which is to say that unlike parts of Europe, they pay. It's not free education, as I enjoyed when I was coming up as an undergraduate. So the students these days have a more transactional sense of university as a means to a job, as a means of getting a qualification towards a job. And of course, this potentially limits the ways in which they understand their university experience, and the idea of wasting time outside of the particular degree that they're studying. I think that's something that is true for students these days that wasn't the case in the past. There are a whole variety of other reasons. Anyway, just a reminder that I'm an English lit professor, so some of my examples will come from that warped world. So I'll try and answer some of the questions that Inez put. So what tools are needed for the implementation of a generalized program? I guess the way I took this was that because of the nature of the university degree at Sydney, and that's true for many in Australia, it's actually built into the system. So a student can take more than one subject in their degree. So an arts degree will have a variety of subjects early on. And that built into that, they are allowed to choose electives. And so these are outside, literally outside the speciality of their degree. One of the longest lived versions of this is the university's arts law degree, where essentially students who do a law degree at Sydney also do a Bachelor of Arts. It's just factored in. And the law degree, and this has been done by several Australian Prime Ministers, Malcolm Turnbull being the most recent. The point is that the arts law degree is a degree in which students complete a law degree over 5 years. Within that time, they also complete a BA in whatever subject they see fit. And some of them in that 5-year degree might take a year out to do an honours degree in English literature. And so some of the best students that we have in our 4th year honours degree are actually law students who have come, they do coursework and they write a thesis, and often very reluctantly they go back to finish their law degree. They have a love for English literature, and they enjoy the kind of imaginative possibilities, the chance to use language in a sophisticated and creative way, and then they go back to becoming lawyers and making money and making their parents happy for all the money they've invested. So this idea of integrating arts degrees and the law is a long-standing one. More recently, though, this has also been true for science and technology. So within the degrees of science and technology students, there are what are called electives, so that students can take subjects outside their main focus. So an engineering student, for example, can legitimately take as an elective a course in creative writing, for example, or they might take something in film studies or English literature or in art. Anthropology students, I'm told, can do film courses, which gives them a chance to consider film structures and that they integrate that into the films that they then make for their anthropological studies. So they are required to make short videos. The point being that because of it's built into the nature of the degree, it's not unusual, it's just the norm. So, I mean, this is a kind of way of institutionalizing the arts in degrees. They can also take a combined degree. So essentially what I did as an undergraduate, which can mix 2 degrees. So a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Commerce, Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Economics. So one of the advantages of that, because of the scale of Sydney, because of its relative size, and I hope the quality of its staff, that a student who's an engineering student, but who goes to do a subject like creative writing, will actually have a high quality person teaching them in that other area. In other words, they'll get a good education in the subject other than the one that they're concentrating for, perhaps as a kind of a job, a career in the future. And of course, that encourages them to get interested in that other area. So the kind of economies of scale, having a large university with high quality staff, allows the students there to engage at a high level outside of their own area of expertise or interest. As well as this kind of large scale integration, there are also what are called open learning environments. So these are short-term courses, short courses, focused courses that students can take. In a sense, they're built into there are spaces within their degree structure. And so any student in the university can take a course. So say, for example, one course that's very popular, it had 1,500 students, was one creating Wikipedia pages. That was run by the creative writing, the writing studies department. But you might also do an introduction to Italian, a sort of, you could dip in for a few hours a week to do an introduction to Italian. And what that means is, of course, that students get a kind of a smorgasbordy effect. But also, and this is something that's, I think we often forget, they come into contact with students who are of the same age, with similar interests, but also with different interests and different expertise, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that there's, the flow-on effect from that is really important, the ways in which the cultures of bringing students together from engineering and arts and the humanities benefits them all. The arts people get a kind of concrete sense of what an engineering world is and vice versa. So the second question was how we get students interested in artistic experiences. So as I say, they can build in these multiple interactions with the degree structure. But I think the Sydney University emphasizes in its advertising to students that they're not here simply to pick up a degree. And so in its targeted advertising to students, I'm just quoting, the university says academic qualifications and good marks are not the only way to successfully engage at university. You should also gain experiences that enhance your employability skills, as these experiences will also provide you with skill examples for your job application. So there's the kind of vocational side. But also, we have over 250 clubs and societies at the university, bringing together students who celebrate their culture, indulge in a favorite food, discuss a fandom, develop a professional network, and more. And I think in this more general way, the university advertises to its students this idea that's a key phrase in E.M. Forster's novel, and this is where I jump into my English lit role, Howard's End, only connect. It's a phrase that has various thematic dimensions in the novel, most obviously in the connection between different types of people. In the case of the novel, a predominantly mercantile and pragmatic English family, the Wilcoxes, and an artistic and intellectual German family, the Schlegels. And Margaret Schlegel, the intellectual, marries Henry Wilcox, the pragmatic businessman, and tries to engage him into a more intellectually interactive world. We get these lines in the novel: only connect, that was her Margaret's whole sermon. Only connect the prose and the passion. I love that idea, the prose and the passion, and both will be exalted, live in fragments no longer. So bringing together these different elements. And Henry, the pragmatist, the argument is my motto is concentrate. I've no intention of frittering away my strength on that sort of thing. And one can imagine various faculties within my university thinking about the arts in this way. And Margaret protests, it isn't frittering away the strength, it's enlarging the space in which you may be strong. And I think that idea of enlarging the space in which you may be strong is a really attractive one that allows students from outside the arts to think of this activity as beneficial to them. Now, how am I going? Another way of interesting students in artistic experiences is to have those experiences readily available. And of course, there are clubs and societies, but again, at Sydney, and the university subsidizes these, but the university also has, because of its size and the fact that it's been around for so long, it has organizations, institutions within its boundaries. So the Sydney College of the Arts, which is where young artists go to learn, but also because, as I said, an engineering student can do an art course. They get a chance to not only experience fresh art and new artists and some of the best artists in the country, but they experience the activity of art, creating art rather than simply observing it. The university has recently opened up a new museum, which brings together collections from 3 different areas. One, science and technology, the other one is art, and the third is archaeology. And so it's one museum that incorporates these sort of 3 areas. And that museum has an academic engagement program built into its remit. So it has curators whose job it is to go and, in a sense, design projects for courses, and vice versa, that university lecturers will get in contact with. And so I was told by one of the curators that a law professor was interested in contract law around antiquities. What are the problems for, if you are trying to bring back antiquities to Australia, et cetera, what's the problem? What are the problems there? And of course, it just so happens that the university, this museum, has mummies, and so they could bring students along and engage them in kind of a touchy-feely sense with what these artifacts really are like. Design students are asked to come along and see the exhibitions within the museum, and then design their own future-proof museum, which brings them into contact with the art, what's going on within in the museum, while they think about the art and design, the kind of design and architecture questions that are, of course, the focus of their degree. So it's bringing students within the world of the university into these engaged sites the university has. What are the immediate and long-term goals? As I say, I'd suggest interacting or integrating the analytical and the creative mindsets. And that's what this particular university museum tries to do. It's part of its remit, and its curator is very enthusiastic. I think it only opened in November. It already has 32 different units, different subject areas using its facilities. And it's, again, trying to sort of push out towards the university, encourage more people well outside the arts to use its holdings. So this idea of enlarging the space in which they can both be strong. The fifth question, the question about transversal, I'll leave that because I wasn't quite sure what transversal meant. And because I'm running out of time, I'll just skip to number 5. How can we monitor the impact of a program of generalized artistic education on student academic and professional lives? So I'm going to activate another part of my interest, which is in surveillance, especially as it's represented in film and in TV and books, of course. So I'm a little wary of the term monitor, which to me always has the implication of spying on people and of reporting back on them to some sort of regulatory body. And my reference in this case is to Dave Eggers' 2013 novel, The Circle. This is kind of a Google Apple sort of campus place. It's a company that in fact spies on everyone and monetizes surveillance. And one of the people within it who rebels against the company draws up a rights of humans in a digital age. And it draws in part on this. Not every human activity can be measured, and the ceaseless pursuit of data to quantify the value of any endeavor is catastrophic to true understanding. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't monitor. I'm just saying, be careful. Sometimes the monitoring can be the way of justifying a program to people who really don't have an interest in it. So what I'm going to suggest is that we carefully think about monitoring the impact of any device program, because maybe we can't monitor it in any meaningful way. The impact of an enlightened staff, a student body, and a general public might be beneficial even if it isn't monitored, maybe because it's not monitored. And so my first literary example argued the case only connect. In this instance, I'd argue that instead of monitoring people or programs, we only disconnect, leave them alone, which seems an appropriate place to finish. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Peter. It was very, very inspiring. I was smiling a lot because I was thinking, besides enjoying a lot of the topics that both you and Fernando and Jennifer have given me for the roundup at the end, is this constant mention to the Black Swan of Nassam Taleb, because one of the things he's been doing in the last month is screaming almost that COVID is not a black swan, according to his hypothesis. And he really gets angry because everybody's talking about the black swan, but I think that everybody agrees in disagreeing with him about the effects of this pandemic of a black swan. And he's a perfect example as a person. He's a mathematician, and he writes very well, and he has this very strong humanistic culture, and it stems out to his work. So thank you so much. And now I will pass the word to Professor Alexandra Sá Costa. And I think I'm really looking to see what you're going to say, being the education expert.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for your kind words. I would like to begin by thanking the invitation to be present at this event, and saying that it is a pleasure and an honor to be here to share some ideas with you. I would like to start by saying that the reflections I bring here are based on the work I do in terms of analysis of educational policies, and underline that what I bring is just that, reflections, not answers, very centered on the why and less on the how, since it is from the first, I think, the why, that the second, the how, will have to be thought. Therefore, I bring here the insightful attention that Roger Dale made when he warned that when we ask what education is, it is necessary to ask not only to whom is being taught what, but also how, by whom, and under what circumstances. How, by whom, and through which structures, processes, institutions are things defined, and how are they governed, organized, and managed? What are the social and individual consequences of these structures and processes? In his work, Roger Dale argued that we are facing the existence of a globally structured agenda for education, which, among other characteristics, takes education as a vehicle for competition and emphasizes the dependence of educational policies on economic policies. We will therefore be at a time when what is commonly defined as the triple mandate of educational systems has come to value the dimension of the provision of an appropriately skilled, qualified, and stratified workforce, making education occupationally relevant. And as António Magalhães, a colleague of mine in the Faculty of Psychology and Educational Sciences, and as he affirms, the global transformations that have occurred in the scope of the production, distribution, and consumption systems in the Western world have contributed enormously to the changes in the models of higher education. As knowledge became an essential factor of production, the economic sectors exert considerable pressure on higher education institutions with regard to their economic relevance. Of course, this discussion is not new, but it has been done mainly to draw the attention to the importance of teaching and learning the arts and humanities also in higher education systems, in times when knowledge is seen as a commodity and it is evaluated in terms of their exchange value in the labor market. See, for example, and to cite works that have gained recognition beyond the academic world, Martha Nussbaum's work, Not for Profit, Why the Democracy Needs Humanities, or Nunzio Ordines, an Italian philosopher, The Utility of the Useless. This conference shows that we can go further and aspire not only to a university that invests in higher education courses from arts and culture, but also to a university that broadens the scope and promotes art and culture within other scientific areas. That is, a university whose objective is not only to prepare for the world of work, but also for personal development and citizen education. The encouragement of personal fulfillment through education, education for its own sake. Thus, it will be a question of rescuing the formation of citizens and personal development as a mission of the university, in order to also contribute, in order to also contribute to the triple mandate of the educational systems that I mentioned before. A university that focuses not only on the development of a cognitive instrumental rationality, but also favors practical moral rationality and aesthetic expressive rationality. In Ordin's words, investing in education and culture means education young people in respect for justice, human solidarity, alterity, democracy, or in the production of active, curious, critical, and mutually respectful democratic citizens, as was defended by John Dewey. However, thinking of integrating artistic experience into the study plans of higher education institutions poses several challenges that are, I think, related mainly to why and how to do it, and that cross modes of organization, pedagogical work, and assessment or evaluation. I want to say that I thought about bringing here the that we don't need evaluation or assessment in this plan. I was not so courageous as Peter was before, and so I bring some challenges only. So risks and challenges. The main challenge related to the why, or to the objectives, to focus on the theme of this panel, will be to escape the myths of art as a redeemer, therapeutic, or enhancer of the development of useful skills from other scientific areas. This is a risk that I think is many times affirmed that if we learn music, we develop competencies for learning maths. Art, the various art, visual, literary, performative, plastic, musical, are important in themselves for the power they contain and for the contribution they are able to make to our realization as human beings and social beings, able to think about the world we live in, create possibilities for agency, participate, and deepen democratic systems. But is the university the only place where people learn? Shouldn't aesthetic experiences take place in other contexts of our life? Is this proposal a way of totalizing the presence of formal education systems or schooling all dimensions of our life? Well, I think that can be imagined as a risk, but despite of that, the truth is that it seems to me that the potential of cultural democratization of the presence of the arts in higher education study plans has more advantages than this announced risk. Another challenge is the how challenge is actually plural and is intrinsically linked to the why. From an organizational point of view, perhaps the most evident answer to how it is to open artistic disciplines in fine arts courses, for example, as a possibility of attending students in any area. But this option also carries serious risks, the biggest, in my view, being that of radically transforming the why, a plan of that, or like this, the why by transforming art training for non-artists into technical competence for non-technicians, privileging, once again, instrumental cognitive rationality. This risk is also present in the configuration of the modes of pedagogical work. How should we learn in a generalized art programs in higher education? Privileging the technical of the creativity act, the accumulation of knowledge, as defended by Elliot Heisner in What Can Education Learn from the Hearts about the Practice of Education, the different ways of thinking necessary to create artistically are relevant to what students do, but above all, they are virtually relevant to all aspects of what we do. In this sense, it will be the modes of artistic making that should, or creating, that should organize the modes of pedagogical work in the sense of creation, experience, and enjoyment. From the point of view of evaluation, both in terms of training program and the learning aspects, the challenge may focus on the tension between the control evaluation and the meaning evaluation. How can we evaluate an artistic training program at university, and how to evaluate the learning achieved? How to deal with the tension between a model of evaluation that verifies the grade of conformity between one ideal model and a phenomenon, that does not consider the context, the temporality, the actors, the meanings, that it is external, that emphasizes on the products, what was made, what wasn't made, that is universal, generalizable, and homogeneous about procedures, produced knowledge, and that is related to accountability. How do we deal with a model of evaluation like that? And in another hand, a model that questions the meanings and pertinence of the phenomenon. Focus on the contexts, the temporality, the actors, the meanings that are created in that context of learning. Emphasizes on the processes, how and why things were made. Integrate non-predicted factors as important elements during the evaluation. A model that is singular, non-generalizable, and heterogeneous, that conceives evaluation as a learning process. These are some of the challenges and risks that I think are essential to take into account when thinking about the integration of artistic experiences into the study plans of higher education institutions. Or in other words, returning to Roger Dale's question, to whom is taught what, but also how, by whom, and under what circumstances. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I think that the panel has completely accomplished, if I had to assess its goals, the goal of gentle subversion. I think you went far way over what I was expecting at the beginning, and I'm so happy. And I have a couple of questions to ask you, the three of you, about what you said. I must say, because everybody revealed their own contexts, and from your different contributions, we know that context is something important, that I am a social scientist from training and from mass media studies. But I've worked with museums since 1999, when I created a company that works with mediation and civic participation. So I think we're all in the same ecosystem, but looking from different point of views. The other thing I wanted to state as that declaration is that I am the daughter, besides teaching in the higher education system for 18 years. I left in 2016 just to work as a consultant, but my father was also a university professor. So I've lived with guys like you my whole life, and it's been an honor. But now going back, and he had a different perspective of the university that I think you share, because one of the things that we have felt, Peter was talking about a lot of being the outsider and about comparing the American or the Australian system with the European. And the fact is that more or less 14 years ago, we went for a big transformation through the Bologna Agreement. And in fact, there was a shuffle from what would be the old European model, a little bit what Alexandra is describing very, very precisely, with the idea of overlapping the educational systems with the economical systems. And in a certain sense, it responds to what would be a broader context, what happened also with health services and with other social state structural servicing, right? And I also feel that COVID, the pandemics, bringing the world to this halt, laid bare the fragilities of a very economic-based agenda versus human-based agenda. And when I'm talking about human, Jennifer, I'm also talking about the planet, about this idea of sustainability. So what I wanted to ask you, I'm going to give you the overall, and then you just can pick and choose what you want to address, each of you, is that if you think that we should go back to the old role of higher education and the arts and the culture, when intertwined, will give that it's not preparing people for the market, but preparing the people for the unknown future. A little bit quoting Ken Robinson, right? So we're preparing people because preparing people from a professional oriented labor stance, it's not really the right thing. So we should be preparing the students, as Fernando put it, as well-rounded human beings, and to embrace the transformational experience that higher education can give to each of us life during all our life course. And to give that, I would like to launch you a challenge, is to have well-rounded students. We also have to have well-rounding teachers, people that are whole in the classroom. I really appreciated the way that you brought in and the idea of Jennifer organizing the plastics exhibition and bringing her own interests into the people's lives. And your role as professors that goes beyond the curricula and in a more, again, humane perspective. And then just to finish this, I would like to talk about this risk, because one of the things I really appreciated was the way that, for example, in Australia and the American tradition, of course, of having the minors and the majors, of the arts and culture or whatever can be truly infused into the curricula, or if we should go for, quoting again an American scholar, John Falk, going for a free choice learning option. So how do we do this? Is it the curricula? Is it a free choice? Is it a balance in this? And then finally, some days ago, I was with, he's Polish, and I really think that Polish people have a form of poetry with their language, hence the great literature that they have. And he was talking about togetherness, about how arts and culture could give us a sense of togetherness. And when you were talking about we could join, through arts and culture, we can join students and also teachers from different subcultures, and together they learn more. So that would be the thing. I was, sorry, I just launched a lot of things into your own baskets, but that's how it is. I'm sorry. That's the effect of arts and culture in our lives. We just mingle everything together. I would start with Alexandra, since she was the last to speak, and just then go back and finish with Jennifer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ines. Well, when you ask if we have to go back to hold the university, that not concerned in preparing for the market, but for the transformation. I don't think that I don't know why do we have to separate things. I don't know why we have to think about them as one or another. What bothers me is that when we think of the relationship between university and the market, it is always in the same direction. University has to come closer to the market. Why not on the contrary? Why are these not relations that are done in bidirectional terms? I remember a few years ago, I was driving and I was listening to the radio, the news, and a great entrepreneur, a Portuguese entrepreneur, was making the opening of the scholar here in a public university, not our university, it is not University of Porto, but it was in a public university. And the main message was university has to be closer to the enterprises. And I was thinking, but why don't we need enterprises to be closer to university? University is, in the last sense, the place where we produce knowledge, where we imagine, where we create. So why do we have to adapt to the necessities of the market? And why don't we have the capacity of influence the market and the market and the organization of society, or whatever? It's much broader than that. So for me, that is not the question is not if we have to prepare for the market or to the transformation. I think that university has to do both things. University has other plans of because we have a social demanding also about about what university do in our children labor market. We have a social goal, but it's important to understand from who has the responsibility of thinking about the politics and organization of the university also, what kind of university we want, and if we want only university that prepares for the labor market. And I think that is a university that is adapted to what it is and not fostering what things can be. I think, well, it's better to shut up because to let other people speak. Sorry.
No, it was very interesting, Alexandra. And I think that's the big thing of being together, is just to join people from all over the world, and we can have an interesting conversation and make new friends in a certain sense. Peter.
Okay, so I was kind of, as Alexandra was thinking, and certainly her talk gave me lots of sort of more concrete and more theorized ideas about the relationship between universities and what we do. But I was thinking just about my sense as and I'm just on the verge of retiring. So the way in which the culture of my university has changed in 25 years. And I think the key change for me is not necessarily in the students, but in the structure of the managerialism of the university. And in a way, you can subvert that by just addressing the students. If we put our energies into the students rather than the fighting managers, then I think, in a sense, you can kind of light the flame, or whatever your metaphor is for activating with students. One of the problems, and I'm sure this is true for many other universities and staff, is the disconnect between the people who have managerial control over us as academics. It's immensely frustrating, it's time consuming, and if you like, I've kind of painted a rather rosy picture of Sydney, but the reality is that as I'm sure it's true everywhere else, the managerial staff has exploded, and the actual teaching staff relative to the student numbers has shrunk, and that puts people under enough endless pressure. And the problem with managers is my argument, managers have to have something to manage. So they have to keep inventing projects to complete, because otherwise they don't have a reason to exist. And so you have a 5-year project that you manage. At the end of the 5 years, if you haven't upgraded to another level and sort of got yourself out of that level or gone to another university, you actually have to come up with another managerial process. And so you do. And one of our staff, one of the staff recently wrote an op-ed in the paper, in our local paper, just saying that we've got a new vice chancellor. And what we want from our new vice chancellor is nothing. We don't want change. We don't want him to come in and stamp his, and it's always sadly been him, his new managerial style on us. So, okay, we've got that relationship, a testy relationship between us as teaching staff and managers. But in fact, in the space of the classroom, we can be as subversive as we want. There is still within the university that opportunity. And I would say for us as academics, that duty to create students that are kind of not managerial, that see the world in this rich way. So, I mean, so under pressure, concentrate on what we have in the classroom with those students, who themselves, of course, have come from a world in which that managerial theory is high. That's, as I said, they're transactional. Deprogram them from that transactional way of understanding the world. And maybe that's, at least in the short term, a positive thing that we can do. Send those deactivated students out into the world, and maybe slowly they can change the culture beyond the university. So I still want us to have power, even as we see ourselves managed, crushed by management. That will do for me.
Much. Jennifer.
Yeah, to answer the first question you asked, I mean, I don't think that we should sort of go back to what universities used to be. I mean, at least in the United States, I mean, the tradition of universities being at least perceived as elitist and is very strong. And as you all know, I'm sure our politics to this day, especially, are being in part driven by that perception. So, the idea that, intellectual labor is not just useless, but subversive in a very kind of devious way. So that's has really impacted the sense of educating students and our roles as faculty today. It's really very disturbing, and I think that is exacerbated by this sort of managerial, the managerial turn, I guess we could call it, in higher education. And I even find that, to speak to Peter's, rosier vision of things, that students are actually resisting that kind of attempt to be subversive. I mean, not all of them, of course, but the transactional nature of higher education, I think that's what they've had for years and years already. These sort of national tests, that they're supposed to reach certain benchmarks and all that. And by the time they've come to us, they are already handicapped, I think, by the expectation that's going to be more of the same, and so our syllabi, for example, are contracts now. I mean, almost literally, almost legally. Like, if you don't put every last little thing down on syllabus, they'll, attendance, how many words, assignment should be. I mean, everything. And you're going to get asked about it. I mean, how many points do I get? And so, I mean, on the one hand, to me, this says there's even more need for the arts and for integrating, create the ideas and processes of creativity, and in ways in which the student can impact the world. And also, I mean, I've heard words, all of us have used these words like, enlarging the space or universal. I'm all down for that. That's what I would like to see. But, speaking of challenges, as Alessandra was saying, that to me is the biggest challenge, that that it's already created well, speaking of plastics, the lack of plasticity, right, is already being cultivated. And the hardest part for us is to crack that. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. You're really giving me food for thought and turning my job of making some kind of nice, thoughtful closing remarks tremendously difficult. But I think everybody, from Fernando with his presentation to you three, have given a very complex, and I should say, Jennifer, quite optimistic view of what can be university. You were talking and I was thinking about in the museum talk, we talk a lot about the role of museums, of participation. I'm looking to notes, participation and engagement as models of communication, and that help the museum to support democracy. And I really think that we could replace museum with university, and it would be the perfect sentence also, because of course it's about this idea of creating a space for people to be whole and to understand that they can be whatever they want to be in the future, because I perfectly understand the idea of that they come from a system that has completely been transactionalized. I'm the mother of teenagers, and I see how we parents relate now with teachers, and it's almost like service providers. And we should change that, but I think that you've really catched that. And during our conversation, and it would almost be a provocation for the next panel, it would be, for whom would the university museums be? Because all of you have talked about your role or your intervention, how you see your own university museum and their role in the interaction with the students. So their goal as arts and culture when related with the student body, and the way that they can create spaces that can be spaces of wonder and could be spaces where people make connections between ideas, but between each others that weren't there when they went through the door. And just to close, I wanted to read a quote from Maria Lind, the Swedish curator. And it's a provocation because it has a lot to do with what you were talking. So you talked about access, you talked about participation. So because something is to expose people, the other one is to guarantee that they participate. I really love the idea of joining curricula and also free choice learning into the debate. And also the idea of being able to disagree, to have actual spaces that people can see, because in our woke culture on what we are living, people have to see, so it's an important inheritance that we bring, is that we agree to disagree, even between colleagues in the faculty, even between students. And now just to close, I want just to read what Maria Lind, because I think you're going to understand why I chose this. So Maria Lind says, when asked if art can change social realities, Lind stated that this rarely takes place directly, but that it can change our imagination and our perception by offering parallel ways of how grasping reality or trying to deal with reality. And I really think that this togetherness and this idea of not always assessing and always measuring the impact, but really, as you put it so well, leaving them alone, just go on with your lives and try to be great human beings, is already a great inheritance. Thank you so much for this beginning of the morning. Jennifer was a lot earlier than the rest of us. And for Peter, the end of the day. I hope you'll have an inspiring evening, and I hope to see you soon. That's one of the wonders of this digital world. Thank you so much. And I will pass the word to the next panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Inês, so much, and to everybody. Great.
Thanks to the help received from the pharmaceutical company Bial, the University of Porto has rebuilt the Faculty of Sciences historic analytical chemistry laboratory, giving it back to the city. Now restored to its early 20th century Art Deco style, we can rediscover the setting that witnessed several generations of students mastering their laboratory skills, developing knowledge that extended far beyond the walls of the academy and provided service to the community. Freire da Silva is the professor who lends his name to this landmark. In the late 19th century, it was he who oversaw the division of the chemistry course into two separate courses, one focused on mineral chemistry and the other one on organic chemistry and analysis. Freire da Silva is also to thank for the creation of the Municipal Chemistry Laboratory, which was used to inspect public hygiene conditions and prevent food fraud. As director of both the Municipal Chemistry Laboratory and the Chemistry Laboratory of the Polytechnic Academy, Freire da Silva implemented innovative methods in the fields of food and forensic chemistry. Who can forget the infamous crime of Rua das Flores? When the municipal laboratory closed down at the beginning of the 20th century, it was the chemistry laboratory of the Academy that took on responsibility for teaching and research, intensifying its commitment to the community. However, this is much, much more than just a story. The scientific instruments on display here are not just for show. It will be a living laboratory. These enameled lava top work benches will soon, once again, see students from the university and secondary schools conducting chemistry experiments. Discovering chemistry is once again at the heart of the laboratory. Don't forget to walk up the staircase to the mezzanine, where you can take in the Art Deco aesthetic in its entirety. Also, keep an eye out for the bust of António Joaquim Ferreira da Silva, created by Teixeira Lopes. This sculpture introduces us to a man whose great legacy we can see. This legacy does not only benefit the University of Porto, however, it is dedicated to improving the quality of life of Porto citizens and contributing to the development of the city and the country. This space will also be used for scientific conferences and debates, and, together with the chemistry laboratories of the University of Coimbra and the University of Lisbon, a heritage route will be created. Through this route, we will revive the tradition of 3 laboratories that, in a 300-kilometer range, tell us the history of chemistry in Portugal over the course of 300 years.
Good morning, Miguel.
Porto has a large tradition of being hosting a people who cherish culture. They go out for theatres, they go out for art exhibitions, they attend concerts, they even go to poetry sessions. My question is, I think this is related to a cultivated bourgeoisie. My question is, do you intend to do something, or are you already doing something to attract a new generation, to pass this tradition on to a new generation and attract different levels of society?
You are right, Miguel. The story of Porto is linked to the bourgeoisie, which the new bourgeoisie, they did not inherit a cultural background. And of course, what they tried is to illuminate their children. And that was the tradition of the city of Porto. When we arrived 8 years ago and when I ran for mayor, we decided that it was not enough. Basically, what we were trying was to attract young people and people who had no access to culture to our temples of culture. Once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year. And we thought that's not enough.
Let me interrupt. What exactly do you mean by temples of culture?
A temple of culture is if you have a museum or if you have the House of Music, which is so important, Casa da Música no Porto. Of course, we can
They work like icons.
They are icons. They are temples. So what we did is traditionally we would attract people, the younger generation, to promenade the concerts, for instance, on a Sunday morning, and we would do. Every child would have an opportunity once a year. That's what we decided. It's not enough. We thought when we looked at the city, we thought of culture as part of a triangle in which we have the economy, and culture is very important for the economy of the city, as we have been able to prove in the last 8 years, and also social cohesion. Somehow, this is a sort of virtuous triangle we wanted to build. And in order to build this virtuous triangle, it was necessary that culture would be accessible to everyone, but not by bringing them to spaces they don't know, but rather to invade the city.
To their spaces.
Exactly, to their spaces. What we called culture in expansion.
Culture in expansion. Okay, I heard about it. I think we can translate. What exactly is that?
Culture in expansion means that we have to look at the people who surround us, not only as spectators, but to involve them in the creativity of the city. And of course, to turn them into actors of the culture. And of course, this is a long process. It's not a process that you can do overnight. And it must be a continuous process. So what we did is, in very poor neighborhoods, for instance, we brought music into the neighborhood, inviting the kids to perform, but not only, but mixing classical music with things like hip hop, and with resident people who would live with those communities for a year, and bringing, and this is a sort of step-by-step development in which people somehow start thinking that they are not spectators, that this is not something which is a luxury. No, it's part of their life. It's part of the cement. So it's building like a cement in society, where we try to convince people that it's not only soccer, and we both like soccer very much, but it's not only soccer that would bring people together. And I think that is the big thing we have been able to do. And these days, people don't look at culture as something of the bourgeoisie. They think of culture as something everybody wants to have access to. And that's the main target we have.
And what about their parents, their families? How do they?
Their families have been, first of all, they suspected a little bit, because some of the culture we brought in was fringe for them. It was a surprising thing. But what we found out is also for them, we bought things like theater, where we asked the parents and even sometimes old people to participate. Theater is a nice melting pot where we brought people together. So for every age group, we sort of brought different programs and then tried to merge. And these days we find that people 80 years old, they go and they look at performances in small clubs, small associations in poor neighborhoods, and that's the sort of thing we bring people together. And it has to do also with the concept of what the city must be. And in these days, we think a city must be, there are two hemispheres. One must be, it must be comfortable, and also it must be interesting. And the cement between these two hemispheres, we think is culture. And of course, the university has performed a fantastic role, because also the University of Porto, which is probably the main tool we have, has been able to comply with this plan for the city. And these days, university has opened its doors. Years ago, when I was a kid, the university was closed. We had no access. It was the professors and the educated people who would go there. These days, university has opened, as you know, cultural centers, which in fact involve the society and knowledge and the culture and science. And this has to do with innovation and sustainability from a social point of view. And when we talk so much about sustainability depends very much on the development of the human society.
Talking about University of Porto, before the pandemic, how many foreign students were there?
I'm not sure. We have discussed a lot, but I think looking at the academy, I think we are talking about something like 30,000 students, which for a city
Foreigners.
which has...
No, but foreigners.
Oh, foreigners. I don't know. I don't know, Miguel. I hate to talk about numbers that I don't know, but we know that many foreign students have decided to study in Porto.
But do you have maybe after the pandemic, things can be as they were before. And my question is, are you prepared to take a look at those foreigner people, students who come to Porto, and involve them in the culture of the city? Do you have any plans to melt in both things?
Well, the university and the FAP, which is the Association of the Students' Unions, Porto has only one big association, which involves all the universities of Porto, and they have been doing a fantastic job. And we articulate with them, because when the foreign students arrive, there is a sort of a break for them, and there is a sort of initiation for them, in which the association, which is a students' union, articulating with the city hall, provides every student with adequate information, so they know where to look for culture, where to look for music, where to look for museums. So that has been the job of the young people. So we don't do it ourselves. What we have been doing is working with the students' union, very much like you do in Britain. I studied in Britain, and the moment I arrived, the students' union was telling me everything, not only the bus schedules, but also where is the museum, where's music going on, what is happening in the city, and that's we articulate with them.
Well, you talked about how important economy can be for a city, and culture can be a part of the economy of the city. I recently read a study of the European Union pointing out exactly that culture can be decisive for economy, for the recovery after the pandemic. Are you aware of that?
Yes, Miguel. When we arrived in 2013, we were in the middle of a terrible crisis in Portugal, and it was a budgetary crisis. And a lot of people suspected that we would be spending money in culture. And we tried to persuade people that we were not spending, we were investing in the city.
Yeah, the idea that spending money in culture is the same thing as wasting money.
Yeah, we sort of made the word subsidy forbidden. You know, we said it's forbidden to use in the vocabulary subsidy when we talk about culture. It's investment. It's the best investment you can do. And we have invested something like 7% of our budget in culture, which for many cities seemed improbable. A lot of people thought this is absolutely crazy, but what people saw is actually it created jobs, it created innovation, it fostered creativity and attraction. Because when foreign people think about investing in a city, what do they want? Again, let's go back to the city that is comfortable and interesting. Nobody wants to invest in a boring city. People want to invest in a lively city, and culture is a fantastic tool. It's fantastic when we speak to investors from all over who come and invest in high-tech companies, for instance, in Porto. They want their kids, they want their families who come to Portugal to know that we are safe, which is very important. Porto is a very safe city. Secondly, they want a very good health system, and Porto has a good health system. They want schools for their children where they can learn their original languages, and we have that. But then the next question is, what about culture? What do I do in Porto? And when we we bring them to Serralves,
Yeah.
for instance, immediately they say, well, this is the sort of place where I want to live, and I'm prepared to live here, and I'm prepared to go the extra mile. You go the extra mile, not only as a tourist, but also when you look at where to work.
Rui, I think you defended well your city, and I think we ran out of time.
We ran out of time. Thank you, Miguel.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, so my name is Nuno Ferran, and I'm moderating this new panel 5. And this is about the museums at the heart of the university. And this. Can you hear me? I have here some. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So my name is Nuno Ferran, and I'm moderating this new panel 5.
Nuno, could you please just leave the other platform or the YouTube? You just have to close YouTube because otherwise we'll be listening to yourself.
Yes, it's very strange. What should I do?
I'm sure. I'm sure that there's a platform on, and I'm sure that there's a YouTube on as well. So okay. You need to close everything but Zoom.
Okay, is that okay?
I believe it's okay now. Thank you. You may proceed. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about this. I'm totally ignorant with these new technologies. It's not yet inclusive for me. Sorry. Okay, because I was involved by just a huge coincidence. I'm involved in a European evaluation of another project, which is Biopolis, and which is in fact my affiliation that is in place in our program today. But okay, so very briefly, the idea is that to have your views, that you can share, all of you, your views about this idea of museums at the heart of the university. I think this is a very special time that we are living today, with the pandemics, and with let's say a kind of a information that is so relevant for everybody, that is so related with my field, which is biology, that is so important, that will be understandable and appropriated by all society, that I don't think there is a more important topic than this one that Fatima chose for us to discuss. And I think that the speakers that we have today are just a huge variety of people involved in very different situations, and that can share with us their vision today for the role of museums in Europe, in the European Union, and the connection between museums and universities, and of course within this general topic, which is university and culture. And we will have examples of people that are leading university museums, and we will start by Professor Paul Smith, which is leading a university museum at Oxford, but then we will have different points of view, and I think it's really important that we will hear the views of other people. As you know, I've been also with Fatima very much involved in this idea of let's say, try to recover a very old museum at the University of Porto, and trying to bring it together to this 21st century by using a different strategy. But I say what the idea is that okay, we will hear you, and we will expect that you can share your experiences, your questions, your interrogations today about the world we live and about the role museums will have in a post-pandemic world. So yeah, I think I should stop here, and I think we should move immediately by welcome today Professor Paul Smith. I have the privilege of knowing Professor Paul Smith myself. We met a few years ago, and we have been in touch multiple times. So it's a great pleasure, Paul, to have you today. Thank you very much again for accepting this. And so the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nuno, and it's a great pleasure to be part of this panel. I'd just like to explore in my few minutes of introduction why university museums are the same as other museums, but also different. We're the same in that we welcome visitors. My own museum, Oxford University Museum of Natural History, welcomes, in pre-pandemic times, 800,000 visitors a year, of which 30% are international visitors. Like other museums, we have family events at the weekend. We have the joyous sound of lots of small children running around very excited about dinosaurs and sometimes other organisms as well. We have a schools learning program, just like many other museums, 42,000 school visitors a year. And of course, we have exhibitions, temporary exhibitions and events. And in that respect, we're like every other museum. And the Oxford University Museum of Natural History is part of a family of museums in Oxford. Some of you will know the Ashmolean Museum, the Pitt Rivers Museum, the History of Science Museum, and we work very closely together. But we work closely together also as university museums. And that, I think, is an important point that we should dwell on for a little moment. When I was growing up, there was a beer advert that I wasn't supposed to be interested in, but I was, a Heineken advert from the 1970s that talks about the beer refreshing the parts that other beers cannot reach. And I think that's true of university museums as well. We do refresh the parts of the community, parts of society that other museums can't reach. For a start off with the public face of universities, of course, we sometimes refer to ourselves in an English context as being the shop window of the university. And that's an important role in making universities less elitist, appear less elitist, less standoffish than they otherwise would be. We are the friendly face, and you know, Oxford can be an austere place at times, lots of closed doors, but that's not true of the universities. We are the open doors of the university. We play an important part in widening participation, increasing the diversity of the student community. And again, that more accessible view of the museum in comparison with the university is important. We talked a little bit during this summit about COVID, of course, inevitably. And I think university museums have a really important role to play at the moment in terms of well-being, in supporting our staff, our students, but also the local community in which we're deeply embedded in getting through this terrible time and in providing some light at the end of the tunnel that people can look forward to coming back into the museums when we reopen, hopefully on the 17th of May. During that time, we've also been very active, like all other museums globally, in terms of digital engagement. And I think that's where university museums are different as well. The university museums are deeply embedded in their universities, and those universities have IT resources that most of the museums, even large national museums, can only dream of. And so you know, we were very quick in being able to respond to the COVID crisis. And we had a variety of things. That we had a series of lectures, a fairly standard type of activity. But actually, within a few lectures, we realized that we were reaching 63 different countries with these lectures. We also play an important role in research infrastructure. Of course, we are a major research hub collectively as university museums. That's one of the things, ways in which we stand out. But also, we're not just research infrastructure. We're not just loaning large numbers of objects a year. We are a place of active research collectively. And then two final points to end with. Universities often talk these days about interdisciplinary research and incubating interdisciplinary research. And various structures have had to be invented across universities globally to enable that. Institutes of advanced studies started in the USA and have gradually crept around the globe. Interdisciplinary centers of one type or another. But we have to remember that university museums have been interdisciplinary incubators for over 400 years now. And that's both a major achievement, but also major potential that universities can tap into. And finally, we have a major role to play in public engagement with research. The research that's done in universities gets into the media, but very little of it gets into the media. And I think university museums have a really major role to play in engaging the public with the research that's being done in the academy, connecting the public with public funded research. And as we face a number of really important global issues, whether it's environmental change, biodiversity loss, climate change, human impacts on the environment in other ways, it's really important that we democratize science and that people understand the issues that they're voting on and that they have to make choices about. And I think university museums are in a really important position to enable those debates, those discussions, and to shape society. And I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Your mic, Nuno.
Okay, because someone did that for myself. I'm not controlling myself, sorry. Okay, thank you very much, Paul. I think this was a very, very nice and concise perspective. What are now university museums? Thank you. And now I will ask Anna maybe for a different perspective. Anna Almedes is, I know Anna also for many years now. She's director of the Natural Science Museum of Barcelona. Very special location, very interesting museum, not related with university. I'm sure Anna will be telling us what is so special about the museum she's responsible for. Thank you, Anna, for coming today.
Good morning. I am, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this chance to talk about about this subject related to our experiences. Of course, I think like everybody else, we would all prefer to be in Porto. Porto is a beautiful city, and I think the mayor has done a very nice description of it, and I agree completely. But anyway, this is giving us also a chance to be together. I feel a bit shy to talk after Paul Smith. I mean, his museum and his university are so powerful, and we are only a smaller museum. But I agree with his approach very, very much. And I would like to tell you briefly about one part of our experience that I think can be useful for a university museum. I am the director of this museum, the Natural Science Museum of Barcelona. It's a 140-year-old museum, and it has evolved, of course, like all of them. And now it has gone from like one site to several different sites. And at the moment, what we have, it's two historical buildings where there is the scientific area of the museum with collections and research and so on. That's in the city center. We also have two botanical gardens. And 10 years ago, we were offered the possibility to use this new building, very big building, in the outskirts of the city. It is a building that had been built for exhibitions, so we thought it could be very good for the public side of the museum. So that was exhibitions, it has classrooms and conference room, etc. The question is, this is in the outskirts, it's not in the best part of town, it's not in the center. But then we decided, I mean, every part of the city deserves to have institutions or museums or whatever. And so we decided, no, we're going to take this opportunity. And what we did was to go over thinking, who should we be? Having yet another site on our museum gave us a very good excuse that not only to prepare the project to move the exhibitions there, but also to decide who are we. And on that thinking, the place where this museum was going to be open was very important. So what we decided after a lot of thinking, and we worked with people, consultants inside and outside, was that we wanted to be an inclusive museum, as this was the definition. So apart from all the other things that all museums do, the scientific part, collections and so on, and this inclusive museum meant that we had to work always in three aspects, which was equity, accessibility, and proximity. And so we were going to try that each project we did at least would touch one of these concepts. Now it's 10 years ago, and this is why I want to talk about this. It's been a very, very successful experience. The area where we are used to be a really rundown area with factories next to the sea, and then some different waves of immigrants from after the Civil War and after the First World War, and then from more modern waves of immigration. So that means there are the communities around there. Some of them are complicated, some of them have been there for a long time, but they're very much closed into themselves, right? So this way of being, we have worked a lot with the communities, a lot with our neighbors. We have asked them what they want. We have found out who they are. When we do, I don't know, the museum night in May, for example, it's all done with street artists of the area, etc., etc. Now, we are very happy with this. We are going to start doing it with the area where the botanical garden is, because we are very proud of how it has worked and how it will be working, because we know now better how to do it. But for example, if you go there on a Sunday afternoon, which they're all free, you would see a lot of families from the most varied places, families that live in the area and that I'm sure that they have never been to the city center or to a museum. And so we know we have put something inside that community. And I think all museums should be social institutions. I mean, we all have our own management works and so on, but apart from this, it was like ICOM said museums had 3 legs. Well, I think they have 4 legs. And there's one leg, which is the social legs. And I think it's an obligation we all have. Paul has talked about this, and I think we are all seeing this. And now, having explained this experience, I just want to link this with what we're doing here today. Of course, there is no need to remind you all that the planet is in a very complicated moment, but by now we know that there will be no solution unless we all act together, all the society. That's not something that the scientists can do or the governments can do. It has to be a much more global and general thing. And museums, we are uniquely placed to approach citizens and give them not just knowledge, but also the means to be critical and know what is the problem like, why we have these problems, and how we should all act. Another thing that is very important is the citizens trust museums. Citizens don't trust governments, They don't trust companies, but they still trust museums. And I think it's because, I'm not ashamed to say that I think most museums, or probably nearly all museums, we are very honest. We work, we love our work, and there's a lot of crazy people like myself and probably like Paul Smith in museums that we work all the hours of the world and we always have ideas to get them better. So people sense this. And I think we must take advantage of this. And I'm saying taking advantage of this of course, in the good sense of it. Natural history museums have to reconnect citizens with nature and with science. And of course, we all need technology. Technology is very useful, especially now with the pandemic. But let's not forget that we have to use technology to grab the citizens and take them back to nature. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to make them understand what we want. And during these past years, due to this work we're doing, people are much more closer to museums and they feel more part of them. But of course, there's more work still to be done. And I think probably this is the same that happens with universities. People still feel that universities are out of reach. Not everybody, of course, and as Paul Smith was saying, it's probably less and less, but there's still a lot of people who see universities as something alien to them and out of reach. And even if this is not necessarily so all the time, and I think museums can help overcome this. I think a university museum is like any other museum. And of course, it should be also a social institution. And I just want to finish, to give two ideas of things that university museums maybe would be very important in doing. One of them is that they should take students closer to what a museum is, to what their own museum. They have a museum in their university. And they should be helping the management of this museum. They should be giving opinions on what this museum should be. And if they could understand really what a museum is and what it's for, I think that's going to help them a lot. And the other thing is that a university museum should be as open as all museums, and probably even more. Because I think it could be a social tool for society to get closer to university through the museum and understand the university is for all of us, and it's a useful tool for the future if we want to have a future. And I think a museum inside a university could be very good at doing this and saying to people, come to the museum like you come to any other, but behind this museum, there's a university. And university, it's something for all of us, and that we all need it. Recently, during the pandemic, somebody said countries should invest in culture because nobody's rich enough to have citizens that have no culture. And I think this is true. This is so my idea. I mean, I don't know, of course, university museums as well. I visit them, but I don't know them as well. But I imagine them really making like a path between society and universities. And this is what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think this was a very nice perspective, a very different one, but also very complementary that we should have in mind. So I want to thank you very much. So we should move on because we are always very tight in time, and we will move now to Nuno Faria. And Nuno is a recent director of, again, a different experience, I think, from my perspective, which is a recent director of the City Museum of Porto. And we will see, again, a different perspective, a different concept that is developing in the last very few years. So please, Nuno, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to say hello to everyone in the panel. I will try to be very synthetic. I think my role, as I was asked to, is mainly to present the museum the city and to the students to have them experiencing with this cultural corridor the spaces, which are many of the museum. I would like to start with by saying, reacting to Anna, that being trained as an art historian and having worked throughout my professional life as a curator and in museums, I'm very suspicious about museums. I think Anne is right. Well, I never thought about that. It's a very interesting perspective that people trust in museums. Yes. If that's correct, I think we have a great responsibility to present them with clear concepts and clear ideas. And I'm not sure if that's always the case, even talking about myself and my experience. So I was, as I was saying, trained as an art historian. I studied in Brussels, and one of my I would say best memories was that I have a card to go to museums, and one of the best experiences I had was to go and visit only one work in a certain museum, the Fine Arts Museum, for instance, to see Maha by David, only to go there and see that work. So I truly believe that museums form you, museums inform you as well, and it really lasts for all of your lives. So the work we are doing, as Anne was saying, it's very much important to to give people of all strata, of all social groups, to provide them with a generous, with very generous perspectives of our history and of our contemporaneity. Well, as Nuno was saying, the City Museum, Museu da Cidade of Porto, it's a project that exists for quite some years now, but in the last 2 years, I was asked by the mayor to rethink the museum. I believe not a city museum like many others. It's quite unique in its terms because it's the city scale or citywide museum. It's a municipal museum, of course, that spans the city's western and eastern zone, covering a very heterogeneous territory in social and geographic terms. It, as we like to call it, a rhizomatic museum, whose most distinctive characteristics are its multiplicity, its horizontal expansion, and its heterogeneity. It's constituted by 17 units or extensions, as we call it, which incorporates a wide array of different spaces, including archaeological sites, water-related sites as a reservoir or an underground gallery, houses, romantic houses, for instance, industrial spaces, areas with gardens, or spaces inside park or estates. Also public libraries and an historical archive. So it's a very diverse museum which concerns the historical time it covers, and also the objects it holds, and also the questions, the subjects, and the topics it deals with. Having said that, I think I think the potential of this specific museum, as I'm talking about this one, being a city-scale museum and in a certain sense, having a relationship of void or empty and spaces the city. I think it's vocation. And opening a parenthesis, we are always looking for the vocation of the museum. I mean, its voice, its aim, its scope, its reach, I would say. So what I said in the beginning, it's true for our work, I think, every time, because these specific times we are living now, maybe, I mean, with the museums closed, with the libraries closed, I think are very difficult times, of course, but at the same time, it can also be the opportunity to put ourselves the question, why do we need museums today or nowadays? Why do we need libraries? Do they serve us still? What challenges? I mean, these are challenges people working in the museums have, but of course also the visitor, the potential public can ask themselves these questions about this void we are living. But just to talk a little bit about and to close my intervention, having said what I say, we believe in with concerns this project and the cultural policy for the city. We want the museum to be much more than a representational space. We want it to be the place for discussing and analyzing the public space in all of its array. Like a forum that foster citizenship, where we listen and we speak, where we make choices. I think it's one of the goals of the museum is to lead people to make choices, and to choice by themselves what they want to see, what they want to think about, what they want to reflect upon. And so I think in which concerns our own project, it's necessary to reinvent the museum's vocation, as I was saying, as a platform for meeting, discussing, building, and experiencing the city. So having this quite unique opportunity to have this polycentric and rhizomatic museum in this quite exciting city to live nowadays gives us, of course, this responsibility, but at the same time gives us a quite unique and enthusiastic experience. And well, together with the city, with university museums, I think we are ready to establish that network and be ready to, in a sense, to reflect and to act in this very difficult historical moment we are living in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nuno, for your perspective and for your new project. Congratulations for what you have been doing these last years. It's really extraordinary. So we move into another exciting city, which is Leiden. And of course, a very well-known historical and city where we can have great museums. And so Ms. Anne-Lore Scholten is head of public engagement, education, and exhibitions in a museum which I think was considered the European Museum of 2019. If I'm correct. But Leiden is also a home, as you know, of a brand new national natural history museum, which is leading in Europe the creation of a unique infrastructure, which name is DISCO, and which is which will be ready by 2025 or 2026, and it will be the first European infrastructure allowing people to have access to millions and millions of objects all over the world that are concentrated in many, many institutions in Europe. But now it's time to hear Anne-Laure. Anne-Laure, thank you very much for being with us this morning, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
My colleague, I'm unmuted, I see. I take you along some images because I find images nice to talk, take them as a guide. I thank you, Nuno, for introduction. Of course, you're talking about our big colleague in Leiden, Naturalis, Center of Biodiversity. We call it the Eiffel Tower of Leiden, and besides Naturalis, we're only very small. But yes, we were awarded the European Museum of the Year award last year or 2 years ago. And I take you along the experience I worked with at the museum. I'm there for 12 years. And it's my experience that a museum is never finished. And we have been, since I joined, we were threatened to be closed by the government because we were too much a temple of science, like the major said in the introduction. And we had to cope with great renewals to make sure we meet with social relevance. And we're still not finished. So I'll take you along some, this is going a little bit too quick, but this is the, this is the first image. You probably never have been to Leiden. It's the white spot in the west part of the Netherlands. It's a little bit similar to Porto, not near to the sea, but like the density of museums.
Yes.
Can I have the next slide, Esther?
Yes.
You see, there's not as many as Porto, but we're only half as big as Porto. We only have about 125,000 inhabitants, and lots of them are students. Yes. There's not one university museum, although most of the collections do come from the university, but we're all independent. And that makes a little bit a difference in our freedom to program exhibitions and other things. The university is though very important, and we have close cooperation with the university. We invite university staff being co-curators in exhibitions, for instance. They're always on the board of advisors for the exhibition program to give us good and actual information. And in 2019, we launched a chair, and it's called Museums, Collections and Society, within the responsibility of the humanities and the archaeology faculties. And we, as a science museum, we are trying to broaden the scope of this chair by adding our scientific curatorial staff. And this will be the case next year. So that might broaden the perspective of this interesting chair in the university and the connection to the museums. Well, take you to the next slide. That is, I show you deliberately all isolated objects because that was what the museum was known for. Its visitors were old, mostly male, and we have a very important scientific collection. It covers 4 centuries of science and medical history. But of course, it could not meet with expectations from juvenile audiences, families, and people with less interest and knowledge in the scientific material. You might recognize some of the, of course, there's Boerhaave in the middle, our name giver, Antoni van Leeuwenhoek with the microscope, very famous, and right at below the fountain pen Albert Einstein used to write his theory of gravity. we're very proud with the collection, but we knew we had to change to meet up with social expectations and to stay a part of the museum, the task museums are given. Can I have the next slide, Esther? Yes, with a new director comes a new mission, and I'm very happy he joined us because we changed our mission, and it was very, like say, it really gave us a direction how to cope with a new installment, because we decided to do away with all the former installments. We were closed for 2 years, and our mission is above, driven by a passion for science. We want all our visitors to discover the vital importance of science for everyday life. And of course, that's very difficult for our curatorial staff because they are very informed about the history of science, but they do not necessarily connect to today's scientific expectations. So that's why we need close cooperation with the university and people from other knowledge institutions. Our goals were clear. We had to reach for younger audiences, new audiences, and we had to connect to, like you say, the educational topics, and most important, show relevance and connect with present and future scientific effort. Can I have the next slide, Esther? I'll take you along a small film, images, because I'm sure you have not visited the museum. It will only take you 2 minutes. And yes, that is the motto of our museum, discover the world of science. Unfortunately, there was a small music, but it was not, it was only for making it a little bit more beautiful. We worked, like I said, for 2 years, and we reopened and we received, and we were very pleased with the award of the European Museum Commission. But also we are very happy ever since with the different visitors. We have many families, the numbers increased, but also the number of families and young people increased. And I think it is with reason, because we inserted interaction. We asked people to reflect on issues, to make them think, and to make the museum visit a very complete and very interesting emotion. Next slide, please. This is maybe, well, even though we reopened in 2017, we realized last year already we should move forward to stay in contact with the audiences. And this is, of course, it's a challenge to everybody. And we've taken up the challenge to one of the venues in the museum. It's concerned with actual science, but we realized that we did not meet with actual and future scientific debates. So we once again closed down part of the museum to reopen in June 2022 with a new venue. It's called Big Questions, and it's all concerned people, planet, and cosmos. And there comes the connection with the topic of today. We will focus on science and on personal stories of scientists behind the recent discoveries and inventions within this frame. And we once again will encourage people to form their own opinion on these pressing current and future issues. And we focus, like I said, on cosmos, planet, and people. Of course, the questions there will be part of the heart of the narrative. The room itself will be completely different, with lots of interaction, with lots of digital equipment to invite the scientists from all over Leiden and the Netherlands to join in debates with the visitors. We are working on it. We'll be opening in June 2022. And good thing for us is that in 2022, Leiden will be, can I have the next slide, Esther? Leiden will be European City of Science, and it will give us the opportunity to test the new venue in the museum, because one of the leading thoughts in the Leiden European City of Science program is to move on to the citizens and to have them, to involve them in the debates within the museums. We will be one of the key partners in this campaign, and we will be thoroughly cooperating in one of the programs, and it's called Knowledge Throughout the Districts. Can I have the next slide? And with Knowledge Throughout the Districts, the Leiden Council expects, like what the Major in his introduction said, that we move on to the citizens themselves. So part of our program next year will be not within the museum, but within in the neighborhoods of Leiden, with all kinds of events. Of course, we'll be profiting from experience we had prior to the to this campaign, and we'll be trying to come into contact with the citizens to see if we can create their curiosity and we can raise their interest in science, and we listen to them. And the test will be that once they come and join the new exhibition on Big Questions, People, Planet, and Cosmos, we hope that, because we will be focusing on these three topics, we hope that they will recognize the promises we'll be making in the neighborhoods, in the districts of Leiden. That was about what I wanted to, the experience we went through in the last 10 years. Just to add something, I have no slide for the digital connection you are addressing in the panel. We are part of a new initiative in the Netherlands with 4 of the major science museums. It's called Inventive, and we will be combining our digital collections, but we'll be inviting young people in the age of 18 till 25 to contribute and to add their own personal connection information to see if, because they have their own perspective and interest, and we want to enrich the catalog of the 4 museums. It will be ready. It will be a project for the next 2 years. So within 2 years, we'll be, I think, have new vocabulary in the collection descriptions. And so that was about Leiden experience, my experience in the Rijksmuseum Boerhaven. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was really very nice to know about all the transformation you are doing. Leiden is a unique city in Europe, as you know, and it's extraordinary that you have decided this concentration. Naturalis is an extraordinary example from my side. I would like to have that in my country, but well, this would be a completely different thing. So thank you very much for sharing your perspective with us. Okay, so we must go, and so If I'm right, we should be back to Porto again, and we should have the Serralves Foundation and the Serralves Contemporary Art Museum, and we must have with us, we think we should have with us, the director of the Contemporary Art Museum in Serralves, Philippe Vergne. Hello, Philippe.
Well, no, I'm not sure he's with us.
He was just a few minutes ago.
He was.
So, yeah, sure. He was there. I saw him it's just missing now, but he was there for the last 10 minutes or so. Fatima, can you help me?
Yes, perhaps we could have the next speaker and then go back to him when he manages to join us again.
Very good. So we will do that. And so it's my pleasure to introduce you to Clara Camacho. Clara Camacho is working at the General Director for Cultural Heritage in Portugal. She's in Lisbon, and so she's let's say she was leading a very important document with our view for the future of Portuguese museums and the whole. So it's a great pleasure to have Clara this morning with us. I think she will be telling us some of this work that was an amazing piece of work done in the last few months. Welcome, Clara. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nuno. Hi, everyone in the panel. Thank you so much for this invitation. Last week at a conference on museums and social responsibility that I had the chance to coordinate under the Portuguese Presidency of the Council of the European Union, we discussed a set of ideas that naturally intersect with those of today's European Summit, and in particular with this panel. From the interventions of that conference, I would like to highlight 4 ideas that allow me to start from a base of current trends to advance to a synthesis of the topics that I intend to address. The first is of a conceptual nature, looking at museums as adaptable and flexible tools, as emphasized by the keynote speaker, François Moraes, and as Anna did in this panel a few minutes ago. The second statement underlines that time is now. It is time for action in museums, said Molly Fannon, CEO of the Museum for the United Nations. The third addresses how to do it. Share democratic control, negotiate, implement networks and partnerships, as David Anderson is doing as director of the National Museum Wales. The fourth concerns the need for evaluation of social impact of what museums do, approached by different speakers. These ideas inform the conceptual and practical environment that I would like to bring to my brief intervention, which will be based, as Nuno already said, on the conclusions of the Portuguese project group Museums in the Future's report that I coordinated in 2019 and 2020. The project group is the outcome of a government initiative, and its members brought together culture professionals and representatives from different government areas, including science and higher education. This project focused on museums, palaces, and monuments under the Ministry of Culture. The mission of the group was to identify and propose measures that would contribute to the sustainability, innovation, and relevance of museums, and leading to recommendations for strategies and proposals that could be translated into public policy measures over the next 10 years. Regarding the topics of this panel, I would start by reminding that audiences are inscribed in the DNA of the museums themselves, from their historical genesis, occupying a central place in the exercise of setting priorities and choices in the perspective of the next decade. The in-depth and differentiated knowledge, the continuous monitoring, the regular evaluation, and the projection of the evolution of the public of each museum is core in the policies directed to society. For instance, in 2015, due to the study of publics of national museums in Portugal, promoted by the Directorate General for Cultural Heritage in partnership with the Portuguese Observatory of Cultural Activities, we knew that young people from 15 to 24 years old, who represent 12% of the Portuguese population, do represent 17% of the total number of visitors of the national museums. The variation by museums is significant in this study. The higher frequency of young people can be found in the national museums like the National Museum Machado de Castro in Coimbra and the National Museum of Contemporary Art in Lisbon, where the proximity to the university may be an important explanatory factor. However, in 2021, we don't have this sort of data, as no other study was implemented since 2015. As civic spaces of knowledge, culture, and learning, it is expected that museums will start, or are already doing, processes of constructive and collective participation of the public in programming, not only in the sense of democratizing access to cultivated culture or high culture, but also of cultural democracy, that is, of access to the wide range of cultural expressions. In our report, we present 50 recommendations for strategies and proposals that can be translated in public policy measures for the museums over the next 10 years. Among them, I selected 8 recommendations regarding young audiences and partnerships between museums and science. Regarding partnerships and networking, one of the first measures proposed to be implemented relates exactly to the establishment of a partnership, a formal partnership between science and cultural heritage. This is a political measure already in place since the publication of the decree law that created the Science in Heritage program last January. Our proposal referred to establish a cooperation agreement with the Ministry of Science, Technology and Higher Education to encourage the promotion of research and development activities in museums. The second recommendation regarding partnerships and regarding the issue of our panel concerns to set up an interministerial working group to deal with problems faced by museums of the central state administration, disseminate good practices, agree on a program dynamics, and draw up proposals for integrated approaches. Regarding digital access, recommendation number 3, set up a Museums of the Future helpline for projects aimed at museums and focusing on investment in technologies, e.g. Wi-Fi, augmented reality, virtual reality, interactive media, accessibility of information and communication. Number 4, to develop a program for systematic reinforcement and extension of the digitization of collections of museums with 2-dimensional reproduction of documents and images and 3-dimensional reproduction of objects and buildings. Number 5, ensure and increase digital access to collections and holdings through open access policies and lay down conditions that will encourage the ownership, reuse, sharing, and use of digital media as educational resources, thereby stimulating participation, innovation, and creativity. And finally, regarding audience engagement, to extend and diversify the opening hours of museums so as to ensure that they have late-night opening hours on a regular basis, adjusted to audience preferences and their location, to promote specific projects targeted to underrepresented audiences in museums in partnership with the governmental areas of youth, migration, labor, citizenship and equality, and finally, to devise action plans for museums with a view to implementing the contract for the social impact of cultural organizations in conjunction with the National Plan for Arts. With this last proposal, I return to the starting point of my presentation. At the Conference on Social Responsibility and Museums, we discussed innovative methodologies for assessing the social impact of museums. We need to know in detail our young audiences, university audiences, their profile, their characteristics, their origins, their interests. We need, from the museum side, of holistic approaches that go beyond the strict metrics on the numbers of visitors with an in-depth knowledge of the audiences. With a transformation from authoritarian organizational culture to a democratic and open culture that ingeniously involves young people, I am sure that we'll be able to advance in the joint and participatory reinforcement of the place of museums and culture at the heart of universities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Clara. Thank you very much also for putting emphasis in this link between science and culture, which many times have been separated, and this strategy and this view, I think it will be great for what we are doing in Portugal and for increasing this connection and putting also more young people into museums, because they are moved by their curiosity and moved by their wish of doing research in many different museums, all aspects related and very much interdisciplinary. That's what I think. So thank you very much for sharing this with us. We have, I think, a great document for the future. Let's see if we can put the document in practice, because sometimes this is, of course, more difficult, but hopefully we will do that. And so I think we should move again, and I think we lost Philippe this morning, and so I think we will be back to a university museum and to the University of Glasgow, to Margaret McCall, and so that will probably talk or link this with the fact that she's a senior lecturer in museum education, museum and arts education, which I think is something of great importance, and I think it will be a new perspective that she will be able to share with us this morning. So thank you very much, Margaret, for being with us this morning. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Nuno, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this discussion. It's been really interesting hearing all the different perspectives today. So I come from a slightly different perspective, as you've just said, because I come from the university lecturer perspective. As you know, I'm also director of postgraduate taught in the School of Education at Glasgow. So I see where lots of different master's programs use our own museum in Glasgow and the Hunterian Museum, and the reasons why it's important for that level of engagement across different master's programs. But I currently lead 3 different master's programs, and they are all very much about education and learning and considering and exploring theory and pedagogies that underpin practices in and through the museum for the public, for visitors, for young people, from the very young to the very old. And so our business is very much about how can museums work with us to engage learners. So, you know, our students will become the museum educators, the heritage educators, the community educators of the future. So it's extremely important that they work closely with museums and with museum staff, including, of course, my own colleagues at the Hunterian Museum in Glasgow. And our university is an old university. Glasgow is 600 years old nearly. And the Hunterian Museum is almost 200 years old, one of the oldest museums in Scotland. And of course, the Hunterian Museum is the legacy of one of the university's teachers, who was himself a teacher, and Sir William Hunter, who bequeathed his own belongings and estate to this fantastic resource that we have on the campus at Glasgow University. Hunter himself was an obstetrician, he was a surgeon, but he was a teacher. And so he very much valued this idea of objects and collections and museum spaces being used to educate, being used to engage society and engage the public. So I think it's very nice that, you know, to be able to talk a little bit about that legacy in this particular context, because it tells us it's something that has been going on for a very long time, but perhaps it's not always quite so obvious, and it's not always the detail of the sort of theoretical side of things is not always discussed as prominently as it might be. So one of the projects that I wanted to talk about that we're involved in is where Glasgow, as some of you may be aware, is hosting the COP26 conference this November. So, you know, we're hosting the United Nations Climate Change Conference. And in the university, there are lots of different projects going on to be part of the COP26 conference and event. And this is very much, of course, thinking about how students can be involved in projects to limit greenhouse gases, and thinking about the United Nations Convention, thinking about Paris Agreement. And so one of the projects that we have come up with our students is to ask the students to consider how they might be able to use the museum campus at the Hunterian to create interventions that encourage people to think about science and culture, and to be able to relate the collections and the spaces to their own lives. But it's really important that the students drive this particular project for us. And they need to feel as though it's their ideas, it's their imagination, it's their thinking that is very much at the heart of this project. And so one of the lenses, which is less well known perhaps, as part of the United Nations framework, is Article 6 of the framework and Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, which acknowledges the importance of education, training, public awareness, public access to information, public participation, and international cooperation. And these 6 elements are very much at the heart of this agreement. But, you know, these are the elements that we want to engage with the students. And this is very much about action for climate empowerment. And so the students from several master's programs in the School of Education, one of the programs being Children's Literature and Literacies, another being Sustainable Futures for Adult, Youth and Community, another being Museum Education students, they will all come together with their own expertise, their ideas, their perspectives, and they will work to use the collections on the campus in the Hunterian Museum and to use the spaces to develop learning materials and resources for visitors. And these resources should be targeted at different groups of visitors and members of the public. So the students themselves will develop these learning resources, these materials, and they will stage interventions physically on the campus with the objects. So thinking about how they can use, for instance, picture books or illustrations in connection with objects that are in the collection, scientific objects, how they can create new narratives around these stories that are there, the potential for these stories. So they will create new narratives and build what they're doing into these resources and materials. And then these resources will be made available to the public using the Huntarians' technology and using their technological platforms. But of course, how that is done is something that needs to be given a huge amount of thought, because we are aware that what we don't want to do is simply develop resources that we simply just put onto a technology site and assume that the public will participate. I think it's been mentioned already about this need for interactive opportunities, synchronous sessions, the quality of technology, how we use it, how we think about engaging people. Are there opportunities for them to participate? And so this is the kind of activity that they will be engaged in, the type of resources they will build and make available through technology. So it's combining all these different elements, but being driven by the students. And at the same time, I'll be working with colleagues in the university and in the Huntarian to develop a new optional master's level course that will offer opportunities for engagement with museum objects and collections to think about sustainable futures, climate change, and to think about how we can engage students from the university who are studying different types of degrees in these big and important ideas and debates. So I think that gives you a little sense of the kind of work that we're doing from an educational perspective and the type of collaboration that we have with our colleagues at the Huntarian. And of course, you know, these collaborations wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the fact that the colleagues that I work with are open and willing to these types of collaborations. They have a commitment to these types of collaborations, but they are also keen to negotiate on ideas, to work together. And that's how we make a success of these kinds of collaborations. But I think, you know, we can't ever take these relationships for granted. They're very important and they have to be nurtured for these types of successful collaborations to take place.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your perspective, which was really important because we didn't have this link between lecturing in this field and having a university museum like the Huntarian, like you were describing. And so this is again a new and complementary view for our panel this morning. And finally, I'm really sorry, it was my fault. Philip was there, he was available, it was a little bit hidden, I think, or my technical problem. But so we are back and we will finish with Porto, the city of Porto again. And of course, if you know Porto, if you visit Porto, there are many things not to miss, but if there is a thing not to miss is Serralves. And because Serralves is much more than a contemporary art museum. Serralves is, of course, architecture. Serralves is landscape. Serralves is environment. And so it's a great pleasure to finish this panel this morning with Philippe Verne. Philippe, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, very well.
Okay. Well, that's progress. I'm sorry, I missed, unfortunately, most of your presentation. I need an education in technology. And it's funny that many of you mentioned the fact that we have the technological tool to connect with audience. And I feel like a Luddite this morning when I couldn't connect with you. Thank you for the nice introduction, Nuno, and thank you for the invitation. I will share some ideas with you, maybe not in a very formal way, but about the way I approach and think about, I would say, the educational part of the work of a museum. But first, if you haven't been to Serralves, Nuno, you're right. You have to come. It's not an option. When you come to Porto, you have to come. And you're right too. It's a museum, but it's more than a museum. It's a museum that belongs to a foundation, and a foundation that also covers a park, in which Serralves does enormous program around sustainability, climate, the environment, biology. There is a Cinémathèque, Casa de Cinema Manuel de Oliveira. There is a very, very aggressive performing art program, and of course, exhibition, collection, and not only a collection of objects. The objects are just objects. More importantly, they are ideas. So I would say it's a collection of ideas, but it's also a collection of buildings, of architecture, as we have several facilities, two designed by Alvaro Siza, one historical Art Deco villa. So more than a museum. I was actually very pleased when I was invited to join this panel for a reason that might sound a bit stupid to all of you when I'm going to phrase it, is your invitation reminded me of something, not reminded me, but confirmed or brought back to my mind that museums are part of the knowledge industry. And in my world, which is the world of contemporary art, over the last, I would say, 15 to 20 years, I think some confusion happened, that the museum became, instead of belonging only to, or belonging to the knowledge industry, became part of the lifestyle industry, entertainment industry, where the measures of success shifted from expertise and scholarship to box office and retail, and which is not bad, but it cannot ignore, or it cannot put on the side the fact that the core of what we do in a museum belongs to knowledge, belongs to scholarship. And because I work in a contemporary art museum, I work with artists. And for me, that's where everything starts. It starts with the artist and the word contemporary, which means with your time. So I work with the artist of my time. And many of the projects we do when it comes to education, or the many ways I think of education comes from the artist. Again, so I go back to your topic. So I assume it's a museum and university, museum in university. We're not a university. We actually develop knowledge in a non-academic way, because we start with the voice and the eyes of the artist. And then when I was thinking of your question or this panel, I started to put together in my mind, actually, what has inspired me in terms of how do we spread the words? How do we share what we do with a broader audience? And I started to think also of who are the artists or the schools or the educational organization that have led the way to the way I would like to think of education in a museum, or in a museum in a connection with a university. And again, I go back to the artist. If there are a few experiences that I want to list that for me have been very formative in terms of the development of education, for lack of a better word, in museum. And the first one I would say is Black Mountain College. And I mentioned Black Mountain College, which was created in, I remember well, in 1933 in the United States, because it was a college run in the post-war area by a group of artists under the leadership of Joseph Albers. But they did something that changed, I think, the way we still today look at art, understand art, and share about art, which was to work across the disciplines. And the disciplines were different than the discipline we face right now. No technology, not sure science was part of it, but it was poetry, it was dance, it was traditional skills. And by doing that, the beehive of multidisciplinary brains that happened at Black Mountain College with Joseph Albers, Annie Albers, John Cage, Jasper Jones, Rauschenberg, Merce Cunningham has changed not only the way we think about art, but the way we receive art. And that for me when we think about what we're talking today, there are this model that we need to go back to. Another one for me, which is important and playful, it's what the artist Robert Filiu called a series of programs that he did on publication and performances at time looked totally demented, but that's also why they were so important, because they were demented. Was called Learning and Teaching as Performing Art, which was really to bring the gesture of creation of the artist, the impulse of the artist, at times the transgressive impulse of the artist with the audience, and asking the audience to participate in this transgressive gesture. The other one, of course, is Joseph Beuys Free University. And the way that, starting, I believe, in 1973, Joseph Beuys has changed, challenged the convention of universities by creating a free access university, a no diploma university, but again, by encouraging the freedom of students. And another example for me that is also inspiring is a school that was created by the artist Daniel Buren and the curator Porto in Paris, which was, if I remember well the name, Institut des Hautes Études en Arts Plastiques, that ran between 1988 and 1995, which was again based on this passage between the disciplines. So that's for me, when I think about education and the way we share our programs, these are the models that are to be across the discipline. Again, in my presentation, I want to go back to this early idea that I mentioned is we learn whether it is about science, and we have the luxury to do that at Serralves because we have this wealth of possibilities from the park, the museum, the architecture, but we learn through the eyes of the artist. I give you an example. Few years ago, 2 years ago, we did a project with the artist Olafur Eliasson. And he came and he visited, and of course, if you work with Olafur Eliasson, you know that you will work across discipline. His interest in science, his interest in environment, of course, of modernist sculpture. All that is part of the package when you work with Olafur. And he came to visit. And he walked through the park, and we were talking about the project and wondering what would be his first reaction. Also, when you welcome an artist, you're a little bit anxious to know, what does he think of the place? How does he look at the place? And of course, when you enter this dialogue with an artist, you don't get the answer you expect. And that's part of the joy, and that's part of the disruption. So we walked around with Olafur, and then after like a 2-hour walk through the park of Serralves, and he started to talk about the project that he wanted to do and that he was actually doing, he came up with an idea, and he noticed something in the park. He told me, it's fantastic. It's fantastic, Serralves. And I was thinking, okay, he loves the collection, he loves the building, he thinks the design is extraordinary. He's impressed by what the museum do. So, as a museum director and a curator, my blood was pumping with pride. And he told me, "You have compost." And I said, "I'm sorry? You have compost?" And I didn't even know it. I said, "Yeah, I went to the farm. The Serralves has a farm." So you have compost there. It's fantastic. Compost is the future of museums. Compost is the future of knowledge. That's where everything goes. And he told me, instead of hiding the compost in the back of the farm, you would make such a powerful gesture if you would actually take your compost and put it right here in front of the museum. The first thing you see when you enter the museum is a pile of compost. So I had to think twice. I'm still thinking, but I learned something from that. Is the beauty of learning from artists is that you start to unlearn. You start to unlearn your own certitudes. You have to de-learn your academic knowledge. You have to start from scratch. And what I learned with this experience, as I learned with the experience with many artists, is that they challenge your conventional wisdom. They challenge the way you can engage with your audience. The example with Olafur is extraordinary, because if you know that, if you do what he does, then you're going to have to engage with your audience differently. You're going to have to explain. One of you was mentioning you need to know your audience. Yeah, if you put a pile of compost in front of your museum, right off the bat, you change your audience. You change the way you have to engage with knowledge and with art history. So what's the beauty, again, for me, basing the knowledge production that we do from the eyes of the artist in a non-academic way is not so much that we will learn about art. We learn about art, but we would learn through the art. We would learn from the art, but through the art. When we work with an artist, when we work in a museum of contemporary art, with the artist, we contribute to address, to unpack, to try to understand the ideas that are framing our time. So the idea of the compost today is a major idea. It might be the idea of moving the compost in the front of the museum might have been more important than the other sculpture of Olafur, which are beautiful and important, that we have in the museum. The other idea in working with art is go also back to something I'm sure you're all very familiar with, but for me, our key benchmark to think about the way we distribute our knowledge and we conceive of knowledge. That's the writing of Paulo Freire from Brazil, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, of the Pedagogy of Freedom, or Bell Hooks' Teaching to Transgress. And I think this notion of transgression, even if the museum is a social place, in a museum where people come and recognize or identify objects and ID, this idea of transgression is extremely important. I think the key is to figure out in our education program, how do we channel this transgression? This transgression for me is also a key word through education to understand a very simple idea. I always tell people, I don't like everything I show in the museum, but I respect it. But more importantly, when I show something in the museum, I make a point to show something that I don't necessarily understand. And I think if we address that to our audience, to teach or to give our visitors this leverage to look at an object, at an idea, at a form, to listen to a sound that they are totally unfamiliar with, we make progress. Because if we learn to understand an object, a project, which is alien to us in the comfortable field and between the comfortable wall of the museum, if we give our visitors a leverage to accept something that might actually disturb them, that might push back on them, but invite them to accept it as an object. If we apply that to the rest of the issues that frame our time, I think we built a better society. Of course, all of that, it's easy to quote bell hooks. It's easy to quote Paulo Freire. It's how do we put that in motion? How do we implement that at the museum? And I think some of you also have mentioned, very practical and important solution. For me, it's to give access. How do we give access? What are the strategies we can use to give access? And how can we encourage our visitors to identify with the museum, to see themselves in the museum? I think if they do not see themselves in the museum, the handshake, the social contract that the museum as a public trust has with its audience is not working. And that was my 8 minutes. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
I think, Philippe, well, I think it was really lucky for all of us that you were not good at technology, because I'm speechless. I think you were doing an amazing job in doing the concluding remarks of this panel. I cannot say. I'm absolutely fascinated by the idea of the compost and what you described. I think you did it very well, this in between art and science. And so I really will make, if you allow me, your words, my words, to close this session, to thanks everybody for the different perspectives we had today, this morning. I'm absolutely sure that museums have a long future ahead, and that they are the institutions for our societies, as Philippe was describing so well. So if Fatima allows me, I will just close the session. Thank you again, and I'm sure we will be in close contact in the near future. So stay safe. Thank you very much for coming this morning. Bye-bye. Thank you, Philippe, for closing the session. This was absolutely brilliant.
I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry.
It was really great. So thank you. Bye-bye. See you soon.
Já reparou que logo aqui, na entrada do edifício histórico da Reitoria da Universidade do Porto, somos confrontados com este fantástico objeto? Este espécime de uma gimnospermica fossilizada tem cerca de 150 milhões de anos. Encontrado nas Caldas da Rainha, poderia ter cerca de 10 metros de altura. Este tipo de objeto aproxima o público da ciência e leva a todos nós um património que é de toda a população.
Já pensaram na quantidade e na diversidade de espécimes e de objetos que os museus podem preservar? E que esses objetos e essas peças podem vir de qualquer lugar do mundo? As coleções de insetos do museu são um bom exemplo porque incluem uma grande diversidade de espécies, quase todos os grupos que se conhecem, embora alguns predominem, como é o caso das borboletas e dos escaravelhos, e uma grande diversidade também de proveniências. Todos os continentes, exceto a Antártida, estão representados, embora alguns predominem também, como é o caso da África, da América do Sul e, claro está, da Europa.
Já pensou que os museus preservam a memória de espécies extintas? Veja este exemplo
que pertence à coleção de peixes do nosso museu. Este exemplar pertence à espécie de estrujão comum, uma espécie já extinta em Portugal nos anos 80 e que se pensa que a principal causa terá sido a construção de barragens que impediu a migração para os locais de reprodução. Neste caso, este exemplar foi capturado no Rio Douro, no início do século XX, na região de Barca d'Alba.
Sabia que no nosso museu existem espécies raras e extintas a nível mundial? Este é o caso do lagarto gigante Cabo Verde, uma espécie que desapareceu da face da Terra no início do século XX. E existem nos museus de história natural de todo o mundo menos de 30 exemplares, um dos quais está aqui no nosso museu. As razões que levaram à extinção desta espécie prendem-se com a subexploração por parte dos seres humanos, que o caçavam para comer, mas também para a introdução de gatos na ilha onde ele existia, que também o predavam. Hoje, se quisermos estudar esta espécie, só podemos recorrer a exemplares em museus de história natural. Este exemplar serve-nos como um alerta para os impactos que a humanidade tem no mundo natural.
Alguma vez pensou que o modo como entendemos os objetos que estão no museu altera ao longo do tempo? Estas bonecas, provenientes do sudoeste de Angola, por serem realizadas maioritariamente pelo grupo cultural Muila, têm o mesmo nome. São feitas de troncos de madeira e revestidas por uma malha de fibras vegetais. Representam crianças com os seus penteados e trajes tradicionais. São feitas por essas mesmas crianças ou por jovens mulheres. As coleções dos museus têm que ser constantemente revisitadas, até porque só assim conseguimos acrescentar conhecimento sobre as mesmas. Estes brinquedos, atualmente exclusivos do mundo rural, pois nas grandes cidades surgem já as bonecas de plástico, foram interpretadas ao longo de todo o século XX como bonecas de fertilidade. Não significa que este brinquedo não tenha também um significado ritual. Estas bonecas, quando a mulher tem o seu primeiro filho, são guardadas no mundo oculto da aldeia.
Sabiam que a anelhagem científica de aves tem proporcionado dados bastante importantes para a conservação de aves há mais de 100 anos? Foi aqui, no nosso museu, que a anelhagem científica de aves se iniciou nos anos 50 e durante várias décadas, com anilhas como estas, foram anilhadas centenas ou milhares de aves em Portugal. Estas anilhas têm uma identificação individual e quando qualquer uma destas aves é novamente recapturada, quer morta ou viva, toda esta informação vai depois para uma base de dados europeia, onde depois nos dará dados muito importantes sobre, por exemplo, a longevidade, a sobrevivência ou os padrões migratórios destas espécies. Este exemplar é um exemplar de uma chilreta e esta espécie de andorinha do mar anã foi anelhada na Alemanha em 1953 e foi coletada na Praia de Lavra 3 anos depois, provavelmente quando estava a migrar para as suas zonas de invernada em África. Nós, como investigadores, quer eu como muitos milhares de outros anilhadores em todo o mundo, continuamos a obter dados bastante robustos para a conservação de aves utilizando a anelhagem científica.
Agora vou-vos mostrar uma coisa que não se vê todos os dias. Quando se fala de aracnídeos, a maioria das pessoas pensará em aranhas e talvez em escorpiões. O exemplar que temos aqui pertence a um grupo que não existe em Portugal, os amblipígios. Como podem ver, tem um grande tamanho, é bastante diferente daquilo que estamos habituados. É um exemplar que foi colhido em São Tomé e Príncipe, na primeira metade do século XX, e que está desde essa altura preservado em meio líquido.
Augusto Nobre foi uma figura icónica da Universidade do Porto, tendo sido pioneiro no estudo da biologia marinha em Portugal e o fundador do Museu de Zoologia. Sabia que, entre o seu legado, nos deixou uma impressionante coleção de ilustrações científicas realizadas por si e publicadas na sua obra A Fauna Marinha de Portugal.
Sabia que os exemplares em coleções de história natural são fundamentais para a descrição de novas espécies? Este é o caso dos espécimes tipo, os espécimes usados durante a descrição dessa espécie. São eles o referencial para a identificação futura deste animal ou desta planta. Caso hajam problemas na identificação, todos os cientistas vão ter que rever o exemplar tipo que está depositado em museus. Por serem exemplares muito importantes no museu, eles são marcados com umas fitas vermelhas. Isto é para que, em caso de emergência, sejam os primeiros exemplares a serem resgatados Isto mostra a sua importância.
Sabia que há 2500 anos já se fazia pão de bolota na Península Ibérica? Estas pequenas sementes carbonizadas que aqui temos são bolotas. Foram recolhidas em 1964 por Joaquim Santos Júnior no sítio arqueológico de São Vicente de Chá, em Montalegre. Esse sítio hoje está coberto pelas águas da Albufeira do Alto Rabagão. É através do estudo deste tipo de sementes carbonizadas, bem como dos ossos de animais que são encontrados nos sítios arqueológicos, que nós conseguimos perceber quais os hábitos alimentares das antigas populações humanas. Estas sementes de bolota, estudadas pelo engenheiro Pinto da Silva, são a prova de que efetivamente a bolota era utilizada no consumo humano. Já o historiador grego Estrabão tinha indicado que os povos da montanha consumiam a bolota, que depois de seca e torrefatada, era moída para fabricar o pão. Os arqueólogos encontram este tipo de sementes um pouco por toda a Europa, comprovando efetivamente que a bolota era utilizada durante a Idade do Ferro.
Já repararam que muitas vezes os espécimes que temos nos museus são a única ligação que temos com a história das populações ou espécies que já não encontramos na natureza? Este é o caso desta espécie, o pão passageiro. Já foi a espécie mais abundante da América do Norte, com mais de 3 mil milhões de indivíduos. E há relatos que dizem que os seus bandos, formados durante a migração, escureciam os céus. Infelizmente, esta espécie também é uma prova que a ação humana pode ter um efeito muito importante na extinção das espécies. Neste caso, a degradação do habitat e a caça intensiva foram determinantes para a extinção desta espécie em poucas décadas no século XIX. A última ave em selvagem foi morta em 1901 e, em 1914, a última ave em cativeiro, uma fêmea chamada Marta, morreu. Este exemplar e muitos outros são uma lembrança e também uma recordação do nosso papel e também da nossa responsabilidade para a conservação da biodiversidade.
Sabia que, para além do seu valor científico, histórico e paisagístico, o Jardim Botânico da Universidade do Porto é fonte de inspiração para escritores e poetas? O espaço que hoje conhecemos como Jardim Botânico está intimamente ligado a dois vultos da literatura portuguesa, Sofia de Melbourne Anderson e Ruben A. Em 1895, os seus avós Joana e João Anderson adquiriram a propriedade à época conhecida como Quinta do Campo Alegre. Enquanto jovens, Sofia e Ruben passaram muito tempo em casa dos avós e as suas obras celebram elementos que ainda hoje encontramos no jardim, como as altas sebes de camélias talhadas, os jardins de bucho, a casa, a adega e as estufas.
Tem ideia de quantas espécies de camélia existem no Jardim Botânico da Universidade do Porto? É uma das coleções mais importantes e distintas do jardim e conta com 25 espécies do género camélia. Esta espécie, camélia japónica, ou como é vulgarmente conhecida por japoneira, tem grande plasticidade genética, por isso conseguimos obter diferentes cultivares com tamanhos, cores e formatos de flores distintos. Já foram identificadas 230 cultivares de camélia japónica, das quais 98 são de origem portuguesa. Em 2020, esta coleção deu ao jardim a distinção de International Camellia Garden of Excellence.
Sabia que no Jardim Botânico da Universidade do Porto, para além de plantas exóticas, temos uma grande coleção de plantas existentes no território português. São espécies autóctones que existem naturalmente no território português e que são muito pouco utilizadas em jardins, mas que são muito interessantes. Por um lado, promovem a biodiversidade e por outro, estão adaptadas às nossas condições. Muitas dessas espécies encontram-se ameaçadas, assim o cultivo destas plantas em jardins acaba por ter uma dupla função. Por um lado, ajudamos à conservação dessas espécies e, por outro, permite a divulgação de conhecimento ao público sobre esta realidade.
Consegue imaginar que estruturas estamos a observar aqui? Será um fóssil ou nem por isso? O que temos aqui são dendrites. As dendrites são muitas vezes confundidas com fósseis vegetais devido à sua forma arborescente, mas, no entanto, as dendrites têm uma origem completamente diferente de um fóssil normal. Neste caso, as dendrites são formadas pela percolação de águas pelas fissuras da rocha e que ao longo do tempo vão depositando óxidos e alguns hidróxidos de ferro e manganês. E daí terem esta forma muito parecida com os fósseis de plantas.
Já pensou em como um simples livro pode mudar a forma como nos vemos? Tudo começou com uma conversa animada numa festa no início dos anos 60. Desmond Morris disse então a um jovem editor que acabara de conhecer que um dia escreveria um livro sobre os seres humanos. Em novembro de 66, fechou-se em casa e nesse mesmo mês escreveu o datiloscrito que aqui vemos. 80.000 palavras datilografadas à velocidade da luz, sem revisões, sem rascunhos, sem um duplicado a papel químico. Nascia assim de Naked Ape, o macaco nu, um dos livros mais controversos e vendidos de sempre.
Já alguma vez ouviram falar em polvo do deserto? É apenas um dos nomes atribuídos à extraordinária Welwitschia mirabilis, uma planta que existe desde o período Jurássico e que tem um crescimento extremamente lento. Pensa-se que poderá viver mais de 1000 anos. A Welwitschia existe apenas num local no mundo, no deserto do Namibe, numa faixa a alguns quilómetros da costa, num local onde existe alguma umidade marítima. A planta pode ser feminina ou masculina e tem apenas 2 folhas que podem atingir 4 metros de comprimento. É precisamente através dessas folhas que consegue absorver a pouca umidade atmosférica existente no local inóspito onde vivem. É uma planta tão emblemática que os jogadores da seleção namibiana de rugby, um desporto muito popular na Namíbia, são apelidados de Welwitschia.
Consegue imaginar para que serve esta caixa? Pelo nome, talvez não adivinhe, mas este objeto que está a observar chama-se vasculum. Ora, um vasculum não é mais do que uma caixa metálica utilizada para guardar plantas colhidas em campo. Ao preservar a sua frescura e tridimensionalidade, permite que estas sejam depois replantadas ou então prensadas e preservadas num herbário. Pensa-se que o vasculo, ou vascula, como se diz no plural, possam ter tido origem nas longas caixas de guardar velas que os estudantes de medicina levavam para o campo para a colheita de plantas medicinais no século XVII. A sua utilização ao longo do século XIX tornou-se tão popular que o seu uso não era exclusivo da área da botânica, mas também os geólogos e entomólogos a utilizavam. A sua capacidade de preservar a umidade e a temperatura fazia com que esta fosse utilizada também para guardar sandes, para serem comidas ao almoço ou ao lanche. E há até quem diga que o seu design inspirou o desenho das sanduicheiras metálicas.
Neste corredor, nos soberbos armários que aqui vêem, estão armazenados instrumentos científicos dos antigos laboratórios de Física e Geologia da Faculdade de Ciências. Ora bem, vou-vos mostrar este instrumento que eu considero dos mais engenhosos que foram produzidos no século XIX. Trata-se de um analisador das frequências que estão presentes num som complexo. Ele é constituído por um conjunto de ressoadores que estão afinados para notas musicais. Cada ressoador está ligado a uma cápsula manométrica. A cápsula manométrica é uma peça que tem uma membrana no meio. A câmara do lado esquerdo liga, portanto, a um dos ressoadores. A câmara do outro lado tem uma entrada de gás e uma saída que vamos inflamar, portanto, vamos produzir uma pequena chama. Quando se emite um som na frente do instrumento, vão entrar em ressonância apenas os ressoadores que estão afinados para as frequências que estão contidas naquele som. E ao entrarem em ressonância, portanto, vão pôr a membrana em vibração e a chama respectiva vai vibrar com a mesma frequência. Isto tudo costuma ser feito numa sala escura para poder visualizar bem a chama. E ao mesmo tempo ela é tão rápida, a frequência é tão elevada, que não conseguimos vê-la, portanto não conseguimos ver as oscilações se não nos socorrermos desta peça que aqui está, que é um paralelepípedo espelhado, que é colocado em rotação rápida, portanto aqui com esta manivela. O que é que isto faz? Faz um efeito de estroboscópio, isto é, nós vamos poder isolar os diferentes saltinhos daquelas chamas que estão ligadas aos ressoadores em ressonância. Portanto, vamos ver as chamas em forma de dente de serra, portanto, aqui refletidos pelas faces do espelho. Aqueles ressoadores que não entraram em ressonância produzem o efeito, aquilo que nós vamos ver é uma mancha clara contínua.
Hi, my name is Paulo Farinha Marques. I am a landscape architect and the director of Botanical Garden at the University of Porto. The Botanical Garden is an area with about 4 hectares and in the middle of the city, and is an eclectic space ordered and designed with high ecological, aesthetic and referential interest. It is a place rich in plants, tales and memories, where the interventions carried out at the end of the 19th century and the second half of the 20th century stand out. Both the proximity of the Atlantic Ocean and the granite substrate create favorable conditions for the cultivation of a diverse, vigorous and multi-layered plant community. It integrates species of several bioclimatic regions of the world, from which collections of camellia, conifers and succulents stand out. The garden unfolds in 3 levels in a mosaic of spaces, habitats and species full of surprises and diversity. In the first landing, the hall of diversity is framed by bosquets and formal gardens, the schist garden, the fish garden, the rose garden and the jays garden, outlined by centennial Camellia japonica edges. On the second landing lays the outdoor cactus garden and the greenhouses. The third level comprises the arboretum, the fernery, the presa and the large pond. The Botanical Garden of Porto is part of the Natural History and Science Museum of the University of Porto. Now, you are going to visit this wonderful place. Allow yourselves to be surprised and enchanted by these walks among trees and shrubs and flowers, and be touched by the unique singularity of this cultivated biodiversity. The bosquet are small, ordered woods that surround the house at the north, east and west. They display a naturalistic composition, casting an ambience of shade and faint light. Unveiling a typical collector's interest, they create a multi-layered habitats of large trees and shrubs with an unusual assemblage of exotic species, mainly represented by cedars, araucarias, sweetgums, oaks, linden, tulip trees, camellias, rhododendrons, redwoods, cinnamon trees, and palm trees. Some places in these bosquets are mentioned in the Sophia's tales and poems. It feels good to walk in the dappled shade and look up through the fine lace of branches to the sky above. The bosquet of the cedars is special because those cedars have been there for a long, long time, almost 100 years ago. The family Andresen, the former owners of the house, have planted them in rows. That's why they grew so close to each other. And now they are a landmark in the garden, and they reveal this fantastic shape when they get old, and they are multi-branched and multi-layered. The Dwarf's Garden is a changing, fanciful place that intends to evoke Sophia's tale, The Forest. The garden presents itself with meandering paths surrounded by a mosaic of small meadows and shrubs topped by aging trunks that recycle the fertility of life. It is an informal place marked by magnolias, cedars, camellias and young oaks of diverse species that highlight the Portuguese biodiversity. In due time, it will create huge trees, rusticity and seclusion, leading us to scenarios of moss and fantastic characters as mentioned in the tale. The dwarfs are not here, and probably they have never been here, but the trees will grow into a mature stage of ecological and aesthetic richness. To the south of the bosquet of the cedars, we can find the Bronze Boy Garden. It is a space with meandering forms similar to the bosquets, revealing a fountain in the style of the Parisian fond d'art. This sculptural element was probably the tease for the famous tale that immortalizes the garden, called The Bronze Boy, by Sophia de Melbourne and Andresen. The garden holds a set of camellias from the Appalachian Mountains, a tulip tree, a holly, a yew, and the metrosideros. It is a place of reverence and romance, very much visited by groups of students and their teachers, probably hoping to see the girl in the fountain turning to the boy they read about. The schist garden was built in the 1950s in the former tennis court of the house, with a modern geometric layout softened by the rustic irregularity of the stones. The circular small ponds in its center form a constructed habitat where cattails, papyrus, and water lilies thrive. The garden also suggests a certain warmness of Doral landscapes, with its schist walls and sidewalks, vineyards, strawberry trees, and lavender. A pedunculate oak surmounts it at its south, emphasizing an autochthonous note. It is a beloved place of events and meetings where poetry, singing, and frogs and reflexes coexist tonefully from time to time. Occasionally, a heron dawns on the edge of the lake, expecting a fat calf to spring. The schist garden was designed by Franz Kopp, a German landscape architect who came and designed the entire botanical garden when it was open to the public in the late 1950s, early 1960s. It is a fantastic place with a very interesting layout, resembling late arts and crafts design, with some touches of modernism, which incitates its interest and originality. The fish garden is a space enclosed by high hedges of camellia made of grass beds bordered by low boxwood edges. Parterre à l'anglaise. Created in the 1950s, the garden owes its name to the shape of the central flower bed. It forms a habitat dominated by herbaceous and shrub coverings, punctuated by citrus and cypresses, with a small collection of ancient roses celebrating spring. It is sunny and bright, good for outdoor performances, and also to be sitting, to read, and to paint. It was a former annuals garden, but now, with difficulties we have with maintenance, it will evolve more interestingly into an orange grove, celebrating the old gardens of Portugal. The rose garden is a formal garden delimited by high hedges of old camellia cultivars. Actually, the camellia cultivar collection is one of the most precious elements we have in these gardens. All the formal gardens facing south are delimited by these edges, and they enclose fine collection of camellia from the end of the 19th century, most of them of Portuguese origin. It develops like a huge carpet facing the south of the house with a geometric pattern layout typical of the late 19th century. It was probably influenced by the gardens of the late Potsdam Horticultural School in Germany, which probably influenced the family who inhabited the house, was very much linked to German culture. It is a simplified habitat dominated by shrubs and subshrubs, displaying a floristic composition with a significant chromatic, textural, and fragrant value. It is the most luminous and central space of the garden, where rose cultivars, mainly hybrid tea roses, grow among aromatic bushes. In its corners, young cypresses rise, pointing up the open sky with an Italian quality. The Jay's Garden is a formal place designed by low box with edges encircled by historic camellia edges. Actually, all these gardens are enclosed by these historic camellia edges, like a network of beauty and flowers. It maintains a symmetrical tracing of the late 19th century, with J-shaped beds, the initials of Joan and Joana Andriessen, the former owners of the Campo Alegre estate, where we are and where the botanical garden took place. It is a habitat of shrubs and herbaceous plants, bulbs and annuals, where the wavy flower beds invite the children to wander and play, exploring the possible labyrinths. At the northern top, under a wisteria, a tiled bench creates a space for contemplation and romance. The Cactus Garden is a xerophytic garden created in the late 1950s by Franz Kopp, very original and very unique. It houses an interesting collection of cactus and succulents, being limited in its southern border by desert and tropical greenhouses. This space exhibits a pseudo-arid environment where plants almost perform like sculptural elements of different sizes and shapes, mainly stressed by aloes, prickly pears, cereals, agaves, and euphorbias. Under the blazing sun, the bold forms of plants expose a setting of sudden textures and colors, casting sharp shadows on the gravel. The arboretum to the south, at lower levels and occupying approximately half of the garden, coexists a woody plant collection of various bioclimatic regions of the world. Along meandering paths, one experiences a more informal set of spaces, where a variety of forest habitats blend and many trees and shrubs can be appreciated developing their natural forms. Several species of deciduous trees, gymnosperms, palms, magnolias, gum trees, bishopwoods and boxwoods stand out conspicuously. Crossed by jays and wood pigeons, it is a place of contrasting light and shade, trunks and branches, stems and leaves, where it feels nice to walk over the fallen leaves on wet autumn mornings. Hi, my name